Call the meeting to order and welcome everybody to the March 9th, 2026 council work session. Can I please have a roll call?
Councillor Blank. Present. Councillor Dowd.
Here.
Councillor Waterman. Councillor Fisher.
Here.
Councillor Leftridge.
Present.
Councillor Nunnally.
Here.
Councillor Walker.
Here.
Councillor Gabrielle. Here. And Mayor Hunter.
Here. We have two items on the agenda for tonight's work session. First item is County Septic Regulation Update. The second item is Kalispell Land Use Plan, Planet 2045 Draft Review. The staff does not have a report on the septic stuff, correct?
No report other than just, at the last council meeting, there was a request to discuss this particular item and invite our representative in, at which time they did provide some public comment to the council regarding their position on this, and that's what I got.
Okay. Yeah, so I think I'd like to start this evening by opening up to public comment. So anyone wishing to address either of the items on the agenda or any item not on the agenda, please step forward to the mic, state your name, or if you're online, raise your hand.
All right, Mr. Mayor, City Council, good evening. My name's Mike Koppel, 203 Trumbull Lane, Columbia Falls. I'm the director of the Whitefish Lake Institute. We're a small nonprofit, science and education based, doing water quality research and water quality monitoring on Whitefish Lake and other local water bodies. Tonight, I thought I would give you basically a background perspective on the septic leachate issue, just to give you some requisite information to make an informed decision. And so, Mr. Mayor, with your permission, I have a handout for council.
Yeah, if you could hand it to Amy here.
Okay.
That'd be great.
So I'll try to breeze through this. I know you guys are short on time. But I want to start with just some natural resource studies that have been conducted here in recent history. And I'll begin with a study conducted by the Whitefish Lake Institute in 2011. And this study looked at indicators of septic leachate entering Whitefish Lake along the shoreline area. And during this study, we used a couple key parameters, the first being looking at the fluorometric value, which is an optical device that looks at optical brightening agents in the water. So the things in your laundry detergent making your whites look their whitest, we can pick those up in the water. And we found indicators of that in Whitefish Lake in multiple locations. And we did some other things as well, but the other big parameter we used was human DNA biomarkers. So human DNA biomarkers are the DNA from the fauna of a human gut, or the organisms from a human gut compared to any other animal. And we found human DNA biomarkers at 3 different locations in Whitefish as well. And if you go to your handout on page 1, if you look at the map on the left, there's a couple yellow dots with black halos. And those are the sites where we found human DNA biomarkers. So pretty conclusive evidence that we have human waste entering Whitefish Lake from multiple locations. Page 2 is a project conducted by the former Flathead Basin Commission, now Western Montana Conservation Commission. And so basically this was a GIS model, a risk assessment model for the topic. And there's 2 main products. The first would be a septic risk physical model. And so on page 2, you can see we combine different parameters, including depth to groundwater, the ability of the soil to treat groundwater, or to treat things as they move through the soil, the distance to surface water, and the actual slope. So 4 key parameters that are integral to allowing leachate to get to groundwater or surface water. So we mashed all those 4 layers together, and we came up with a physical risk model. And we then overlaid the current septic density and age classes on top of that, right? So the overall product is found to the right. And those are the areas that the model demonstrates that we should be concerned about today, or back in 2020 when this model was produced. If you move to page 3, it drills down a little bit on septic age analysis. So the figure on the right displays all the septics in Flathead County that we know about, and there's a little caveat to that. I'll get to it. And you can see in the pie charts, we have the age cohorts broken down. And as of 2020, we had roughly 30% of the septics that were age 80 or age 30 years old or older. And we know conventional wisdom is that septics systems last on average 25, 30 years, at which time they underperform or don't perform and they need to be replaced. So again, this was before COVID, before we had a big influx of new residents and growth, but we did project out to 2030, and you can see there we're projecting out just under 50% of the septics on the landscape in Flathead County will be 30 years of age or older. So cause for concern. I think we're the generation that's dealing with this aging infrastructure, and it's on us to deal with it. This is personal infrastructure, just like, you know, if you have a faulty roof and you have leakage, you're going to call someone tomorrow. This is just underground, and oftentimes you can't see it, right? But still, again, personal infrastructure. So page 4 gets in, I blew up these maps, I apologize. This is pretty small scale stuff here to try to interpret, but it gives you the final product of the physical risk assessment, and to the right is the existing septic risk model. So I key in on Whitefish Lake, for instance, and there's a couple areas that have the reddish tinge to them, and this model basically corroborates what we found on the ground or in the water, so it gives me confidence in the model. On page 5, the caveat I was speaking to earlier is that Flathead County did not start requiring septic permits until 1978, and so we don't have data on pre-1978. So we went through an exercise, or the Flathead Basin Commission went through the exercise of trying to determine how many unpermitted septics are on the landscape. And our best guess through a mail-out survey and response, and you can see on this map, these are just parcels, right? So they're not actual dots for septic systems, they're just dots, the whole parcel's color shaded. We estimate that we're just shy of 30,000 septics in Flathead County. And so you can suspect that most of those are older than 30 or 40 years already, right? So if you go back to the pie chart on a couple, on whatever page that was, page 3, you can expect those cohorts of age classes to just, you know, we're already probably pushing 40 to 50% on aging infrastructure. So then a question I get asked all the time, you know, we're demonstrating scientifically that we have septic leachate reaching our water bodies. The question is always like, well, prove it's mine, right? Prove it's my crap that's entering the lake or the river. And that's inherently hard to do, right? It costs a lot of money and time to do it. So to get to answering that question, we partnered with Cornell University to introduce synthetic DNA. So this just takes a synthetically derived DNA snippet, right, encased in a biodegradable polymer that dissolves over time. And they're just little nanoparticles, looks like little talcum powder in a little vial. And we introduced these synthetic DNA tracers on Whitefish Lake and Lake Mary Ronan at 8 sites each. It was just a pilot study. And I personally, you know, flushed this down 8 subjects' toilets, and then we started filling up bottles with water along the lake. And we tried to pick study locations that were varied in both age of septic system and geologic type, for instance. So we found at the end of the day, Cornell University had problems running 2 of the samples. So of the 8, only 6 worked. I don't know exactly what happened on Cornell's end. But of the 6, we found all 6 in Whitefish Lake and Lake Mary Ronan. So 100% positive rate on finding this stuff. So it tells us that there is definitely a groundwater pattern or groundwater availability for septic leachate to get to our water bodies. I'm not going to stand up here and tell you exactly how phosphorus or nitrogen or human pathogens behave in soil as compared to synthetic DNA. All I'm saying is that we definitely have transport systems via groundwater for this stuff to get into our lakes. And then finally, the last study I just want to touch upon is a pilot pharmaceutical and personal care product testing that was conducted in cooperation between the Whitefish Lake Institute and the Flathead Lake Biological Station on Whitefish Lake and Flathead Lake. And so pharmaceuticals are just another way of determining if we have septic leachate, because when you take a drug, a pill, your body doesn't fully metabolize it, so you're going to pee off some excess, right? And we're finding that in our water. So in Whitefish Lake, for instance, of 17 potential pharmaceutical compounds, we found 16 different compounds. And again, this is strong evidence that we have septic leachate migrating to Whitefish Lake and Flathead Lake. So I guess what I'm trying to say is I think the natural resource studies have demonstrated that we have an issue, right? And we're the generation that's responsible for fixing it. How we fix it is up to you guys and Flathead County. But I will say that our lakes are of huge importance here locally. You're talking about DEQ Circular 4 probably tonight, right? Those are state standards, right, for all of Montana. I would submit to you that the lakes of northwest Montana are different, meaning we have more lakes, more water, right, than other areas of the lake. These lakes are economic drivers. We identify with these lakes. They're lifestyle components for us and our guests, and so they're worthy of our protection. So I hope that you keep that in consideration. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cole.
My name is Russell Sias. I live in Columbia Falls at the moment. I was born here in Kalispell, where Super One is at, as a matter of fact, about 100 years ago. I have spent my life doing several things, and one of them was building in concrete. And I'm not here selling concrete. That's way too much work. Anyway, what I came tonight to suggest to you, and I know you've all got more money than you know what to do with. So what I would hope you would consider is, have you ever heard of a safe haven baby box? If you have not, I can help you with that. I can hook you up with the outfit that does the safe haven baby box. What they are, for those of you who do not know, is they are usually installed in the wall of a fire department or a 24-hour police department or something like that, and they're put in the wall. And so on one side you have a street access where some new mom can deposit a new baby. They are climate controlled, they are air conditioned, they are everything just so for this probably day-old baby. On the other side of the wall is another door. And when mom sticks a baby in there, the bell goes off on the other side. And so the fire department is notified, or police department, whoever is in charge of this thing. And it takes care of babies that wind up in a trash can. And that's primarily what this thing is about. I have been part of Montana's for Life. There's an outfit in Hamilton that is kind of big on preventing abortion, taking care of the newborn, those kind of things. And this is probably the best system around. It's costs a little to put it in. Last I heard, I am one of those that believe that babies are created at conception, and from then on, that's a real human life. And these things are designed to provide the pregnant mother with an option to not have to abort a baby. Anyway, if you have any questions, ask, or not. I will leave you my card, and at least consider it. We got a fire department here that's got a wall on the south side of it that ought to have that box. That's what I see just driving down the street. And I think it's a excellent, other than telling people to keep their pants on, it's a good solution. So, and it does save lives. So, I don't know who wants the card. Okay, here you go.
Thank you, sir.
Good evening, all. Nice to see you. I don't know if most of you know this, but I'm the longtime mayor of Columbia Falls, and I've been asked to come here. I'm also the chairman of the City County Health Board. So I've been asked if I could come and just kind of give you an overview of the proposed changes that are being presented to the county commissioners. We started that process approximately 18 months ago, and I am on the committee. There were 3 folks on that committee, plus me. We had 2 engineers, 2 local engineers, a county commissioner, and myself. And we started this process for several reasons. One of them was to, in my mind, the number one reason was to assist the public in being able to get their septic systems approved and through the works in a more efficient manner, because we keep hearing that it just takes so long. By the way, I have 50 years of experience in installing septic systems and digging holes. I had a excavating company up in the North Valley for 50 years. That's the only job I had, quite honestly. So I'm real well experienced in that. I've also been I was one of the first designers back in 2004 when we first started doing pressure dose systems. So I've got a lot of experience in this. So that was kind of my part of that committee. Now, working with environmental health, I'm very familiar with what we did. So we're trying to make it more efficient for the public, but we're also trying to make it more efficient for the staff and of environmental health. Environmental health is a group of very hardworking people. And as you guys know, the population has just gone crazy here. And we talk about, well, it's all in town. It's not, obviously. Yeah, for instance, I met with those folks this morning, and I found out in the last 4 or 5 years, there's 600 new septic systems put in the ground in Flathead County every year. There have been, normally I don't do notes, but there were some numbers I'm not real good with. 21,000 septic systems in 35 years in our valley. So that being said, there's a lot of septic systems. I would just as soon everybody came to the point sources. The cities would have treatment plants because we're held to a really high standard, as you guys know. And it costs us a lot of money to do this. But by the time we're done with it, it's well treated. We're not harming the environment, and we're adhering to the rules. That we're mandated to do that. So again, 18 months ago, and we heard presentations from the environmental health folks. And the one thing that kept coming up was initially it was, well, let's just get rid of all of our rules and regulations. And let's just go to DEQ 4, Circular 4, or yeah, DEQ Circ 4, which we almost mirror already with ours. Actually, I think when ours was put together, that's exactly the way that it was put together, was to mirror that. Flathead County is a little bit unique, and we added a few other things. And I guess the largest thing right now that has come up in we're making some really nice changes, A lot of people will have to apply for variances, which took up a lot of staff time, a lot of the meeting time, or a lot of the time from the Board of Health to look at these and get the findings of fact and go over them. And quite honestly, by the time they got to us, they were pretty much ready to be granted. But it was a long process, and it was an expensive process for these folks to do this. A couple of things we did is we tried to reduce that. One of the things is we looked at some new technology. Now we can do a incinerating septic system, which takes both your gray water and your solids and turns it into a pure ash. So there's nothing being put into the ground at all. That was something the state and the Department of Environmental Quality said, no, we'll look at that, but that's something that you're going to have to do a variance on. For a while, I think we did 5 of those, and what those were for is these folks that are moving into places that no one would have wanted to build before. They're looking at, we want to do this by a river, we want to do this with high groundwater at 2 feet. So what can we do? So the incinerating, the new technology, and that's also included in these changes. We made the length of a valid septic permit longer because of the length of time that it takes for someone to develop a home. So they're going to come in and get that up front so they know where the septic system's going to go instead of going, oh, this is where I wanted my house. I doggone it. Now I found out that's where my septic system needed to go. So we've made those changes in this new document that's going to the county. The contentious one was obviously going back to gravity septic systems. Now the difference is in 2004, it was put forward by at the time the director of the health department was Joe Russell. It was put forward to meet a rule that 1996 was put forward by the state called degradation, non-degradation of the water sources in the ground. So how do you do that? Well, what you have to do is you take the nitrates and you take the effluent out of a septic tank, you evenly distribute it in a large area, it's absorbed, it goes up, it goes down, goes out, and it allows the bugs to work. This replaced a lot of systems that were put in prior to that, which were gravity systems, unfortunately. And my experience, I put in thousands of gravity systems, trust me. You do the best you can, but a gravity system oftentimes will fail. And what I mean by failure is it won't treat the effluent. It's not going to treat it. What it's going to do is it's going to dispose of it. So most people I ran into say, well, you know what? It's great. I just pull the handle, it goes away, and I don't worry about it. They also will tell you that I haven't pumped my system for 20 years and it works great. That is not effective taking care of of cleaning up what you're putting in the ground at all. That is not treatment. That's just disposal. So by going to this in 2004, the county looked at this, had a bunch of meetings with it, had public hearings, and determined that, yeah, in order to protect what we have in this valley, and that is a huge amount of groundwater, a huge amount of surface water. It's an unbelievable amount. We have more acres of surface water in Flathead County than anyone else. Plus, look at the size of the county. Now take that area and make it smaller. Put it where are we? Where are we developing? We're developing right in here. How many bodies of water do we all know? Consequently, it's very important that we do the best we can as the number of septics expand at treating our effluent and putting something into the ground that is not going to cause problems. So what it's come down to is people say, well, everyone should have an opportunity to put a gravity system in because the state DEQ allows that. In that allowance, they also say that you can put in a pit privy. I don't know if you know what a pit privy is, but it's an outhouse. You can go get a permit right now for an outhouse, or you can go get one for, let's put a dry well in the ground, put some gravel around it, and you can put that in there. Now there is zero treatment. You're not talking about treatment, but what people are overlooking is the fact that that is included in this change going to gravity systems. It's not just simply giving somebody an opportunity to have a choice and save money. As far as money savings, in my time putting them in, initially it was more expensive to put in a pressure dose system. Over time, I believe it's almost equaled out. You take a lot less area to put them in, to put in a pressure dose system. If they're properly installed, properly maintained, they work wonderful. They can be rejuvenated. If for some reason you get solids out in your field, rather than destroying a good portion of your gravity system, you can clean it out. They can be pressure washed out and rejuvenated essentially if you do have a failure. But there again, that goes to maintenance. People just have to learn to maintain these systems. So in going back to gravity, the other argument was, besides cost, which I really doubt, the other one going back to it is, well, if I live up Cold Creek, up the North Fork, I don't have an opportunity to do that because I don't have power. That's true. You don't. Although at this time, several of the systems that are up there, those folks have put in power because they want to have a well. They want to have some lights. So they're putting in solar or whatever they can. So there are some of those, but there's always going to be more. We're going to go to the West Valley and up the side of those hills. And those people up there do not have access to power unless they've got an extra $100,000 or more. So my proposal is at this time is that we go to an already have it in our rules and regulations. It's called a deviation. A deviation would serve two purposes. One, it would allow you to come forward with a plan that shows you can't get power. Because of that, you want to be able to put in a gravity system, and you have to meet certain criteria. Criteria such as ground type, how it'll absorb, if you have the area for it, that needs to be brought forward. Unfortunately, at this time, our regulations say that that is not available to people with new housing, which it's a very simple process of changing that and said just get rid of the new. Unfortunately, it was at the end of, close to the end of 18 months that was even considered. It was never looked at, the deviation process. The other cool thing about deviation is that it's administrative, so it serves two purposes. If you bring in the information, you present it to our health department or to environmental health, they can look at that and they say it meets all the criteria. Here's our criteria for that deviation. If you meet it, we'll send that to the director, and the director will look at that, take our recommendation, and approve it. It's not a variance. It saved them from having to go through a variance procedure. So that has served to make the staff more efficient down there. As far as the comment has been made, the process of gravity treats our effluent as well as doing a pressure dose system. Funny, 2 weeks before we took the final vote to approve these changes, I asked the entire board. I said, "How would you feel about deleting or adding gravity?" The vote at that time was 5 for gravity and 4 against, and 4 staying with the way it was. My argument has always been, let's leave it the way it is because we're protecting what we have. It's in place. It works well. 2 weeks later, we came back to actually approve or disapprove sending this forward. The vote had changed to 7 against, and I was the only one for leaving out where it was. The argument was, and I really appreciate working with Rod Kuntz, your representative. He's a very smart gentleman, and a pleasure to work with him. The argument came back, well, we looked at the scientific evidence. Scientific evidence said that this gravity treatment or gravity systems treat the effluent as well as doing a pressure dose. This morning, when I brought that up to the environmental health folks, they said, well, some studies do, but there's just as many studies that point out that no, it does not. So half and half, but I believe that's what turned people over. They were kind of directed to this, look at this study and it'll show that. So I still stand by the fact that we have a system right now since 2004 that's worked well to protect our groundwater, which I think is our number one concern with all the growth we have. If the groundwater is contaminated, it's going to haunt us for the rest of our lives. So I would submit that the best method, as advised by DEQ4, the best method is pointed out that it is a pressure dose system. They're saying that's what you should do. And yet we're allowing people to walk into the health department, if this is approved, and say, I want gravity. And they're going to try to say that is not the best system. They're going to say, but I want gravity. So the health department folks are going to have to go out, they'll evaluate it. They'll say, okay, go ahead and turn in your paperwork. They go out to look at it, and they're saying, because you haven't done a lot of these, we don't have a lot of criteria for this. Our people are new. You're going to have to call us when you get it done right. You're not meeting the criteria, the process to do this. So it costs the people extra money to have a reinspection. It costs the department the extra time and money to do a reinspection to try to get people to understand how to put in gravity systems. They're not as simple as people seem to think. Like I said, I put them in for many, many years. They have a tendency to fail. They have a tendency to not spread it out equally. They work in a failure mode. They fail here, they move on, they fail next, they move on, and they fail there. They're not treating what they're doing as disposing. So I would submit that the folks of the Flathead Valley would be taking a huge step backwards by allowing gravity systems to come back in as one of the regulations that possibly can be approved by the Board of Health and Environmental Health. So at this time, I understand it's a work session. I'm sorry I'm taking so much of your time. I work a lot of these myself, so I understand your time is valuable. But if there's anyone that has any specific questions, I would be more than happy to answer them. Also, you could also contact, just for questions and answers, you could also contact the folks at Environmental Health. But at this time, is there any specific questions that I might be able to answer, both using my experience and my time on the Board of Health? Ma'am? Oh, I'm sorry. I should know better. I'm used to deferring as a mayor, so please, I'm sorry. Councilperson.
Yeah, we'll take more public comment, and then during the discussion, we can get into questions if we have them. So
Very good.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mary Flowers with Citizens for a Better Flathead. And this is an issue that we have been following and attending the meetings at the health department as well to learn about it. So I have a packet that I'd like to, while it's thick, I want to just quickly walk you through it just so that you have the resources and the information. So as soon as those get around, I'll start here. So I'm actually going to skip over the first page and come back to that in just a minute. But if you go to the second page, this is a page out of what Mayor Barnhart just talked about, DEQ 4. And this talks about the importance and the value of a pressure dose system. And if you look at the highlighted section there, it says dosing outperforms gravity flow systems because distribution is more uniform, controlled, and can be used in any application. Pressure dose distribution should be the method of choice whenever possible. You read this entire page if you want to come back to it later. It really lays out that gravity-fed systems are often fail and the downsides of those systems. This is our state DEQ, who regulates our county health department, and who in 2004, the county got approval from that agency to require pressure dose systems in the county. So this is a really strong argument that pressure dose systems are better and they are the preferred system by state DEQ. The next page is a page from a PowerPoint that was done by the staff at the health department. And this really speaks to the issue of why in Flathead County, pressure dose systems are even more critical than elsewhere. And again, the mayor spoke to this as well. Flathead County has more residents living outside the city limits than any other county in Montana. We have the most surface water, and much of Flathead County is steep and rugged, which is not conducive. So again, as the mayor was saying, you're condensing where these septic systems are going in. So finding places to, for septic, for applying septic that is pumped from septic tanks is also becoming more difficult. And as you are learning, your biosolids are becoming more of a challenge on where you can take those and what you can do with them. So if you flip to the next page, and this is a page that is taken directly out of the Flathead County Health Department regulations. And the highlighted section there, 4.3, all sewage systems in Flathead County shall utilize uniform pressure distribution. Plans and specifications shall be prepared by a professional engineer or a sewage treatment system designer certified by the department. This is the part that was adopted in 2004. This has been on the books for decades now, and it's been successful and it's worked, and we think it should be retained. What the resolution that the county commissioners will be considering here, because they do have a final decision on this issue, is the health department board just voted to totally remove 4.3. So that would be gone. We want to see that retained. Then if you flip to the next page, I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but this was an editorial that appeared in our Daily Interlake, and it's worth the read. It really emphasizes that our water resources are too valuable to lose, and I think the prior two speakers just made excellent points about that. So then if you go to the next page, that's with our letterhead on it. These are the comments that we submitted to the Flathead County Health Department. And I included them in part because there is one of the things that we went to the county with, in addition to saying, please don't change this reg, we want you to retain it, is we had been working, as you have probably heard, on the regulations that govern the setbacks on the lakeshore protection areas. And we had been at a hearing at the planning board looking at changes to those set of regulations. And at the end of the meeting, Jeff Larson, who is an engineer himself and chair of the planning board, said, you know what Flathead County needs more than anything right now to protect water quality is we need to require a higher level of treatment. A level 2 system is a higher level of treatment in areas, particularly when we know that they are draining into impaired water bodies. And a lot of the water bodies in Flathead County have become impaired because of pollution to those bodies. So I did some research on that and found that Gallatin County has recently adopted a resolution that requires that if you're installing a septic system that's going to be draining into an impaired water body, you are required to do an advanced level of treatment. I took that to the health board in addition to saying, let's not change the regulations, but let's make them even better. That has not gotten any discussion at all. And I would like to see you consider, if you do comment on this issue, that you encourage the county to go back and the health department to go back and look at how can we improve it. We know that we have impaired water bodies, and we haven't taken the steps to put in place practices that will reduce the level of TMDLs in our water bodies and the degradation of those water bodies. This is just like we were a leader in deciding to require pressure dose systems, we should be looking at, and the maps that Mike talked about show us areas that are really critical to have better treatment. An advanced treatment, and Don, you can correct me on this if I'm wrong, but I think it reduces the amount of pollution coming out of a system by 50%. That's a huge amount to reduce the nitrates and phosphates coming out. I think it's nitrates is the 50%, the phosphate maybe less. But those advanced systems, again, can help us protect our water quality here in Flathead County. So I want to go back to the first page here now. And again, we are recommending that there doesn't need to be a change in terms of pressure dose systems. We think the system is working. But as Don said, there are some folks that feel like, well, we're in a unique situation. We need an option. So I think there's a simple fix for that, and we can retain the pressure dose system, but under section 13, which I've quoted here directly out of the regulations, this is a deviation. And it says the health officer may grant a deviation from the requirements of the regulations and construction standards in certain circumstances. Deviations from the regulations and construction standards, and it can in unique situations. Again, because it becomes a deviation, they do the work to prove that that's possible, and then it doesn't have to go through the whole long variance process. It can be administratively approved. So we think that that is a compromise that might be considered. So then, as part of the city council, some of you may have the question, well, this is a county issue, it's not really a city issue. And I would suggest that it is a city issue. And Joe Russell, who is a former sanitarian and head of our health department, when he put these regulations in place, it was in part because cities like you were struggling to meet water quality standards with your sewage treatment plant. And part of that is because of Ashley Creek. And there are lots of septic systems along Ashley Creek which contribute to the nutrients getting into that creek. And then when you're trying to use that creek to dispose of the wastewater that you've gone to great expense to treat, you have limited capacity to do that. The city recently went to DEQ to ask for some changes in the standards on Ashley Creek and the amount of nutrients it could take. And I'm still confused on what DEQ said. It didn't approve it, but it said it's kind of still considering it, I think. And I haven't tracked exactly where that standard's at. But this is an issue that affects city residents as well. If you want to have a cost-effective system for the city and for the disposal of your sewage in Ashley Creek, you need to look at how septic systems are being approved outside of the city. A number of years ago, and I didn't have time to look up the subdivision, but as you're annexing in subdivisions, you had one come in with 100 units on 100 lots, all on septic systems. It's probably been 5 years ago, but it was west of town, and the county approved it. And I went, oh my gosh, that's intense septic systems. If we removed these regulations so they didn't have to be pressure dosed, they would be even less effective. City of Whitefish, fortunately, the county commissioners just denied a subdivision where the developer said, approve me because I'm just going to go to the county and do septic systems. Well, fortunately, the county denied that and said, no, you should really be on the city sewer. We need to see more of that leadership from our county commissioners, and I applaud them for doing that. But I believe the last time I looked at your permit for your septic treatment plant, your last approval, and you've been going on temporary approval since 2015, you were struggling to meet the standards of the state in Ashley Creek. And I think it is important that as a city, you do everything you can to work to make sure that septic systems around the city are not contributing to limiting your ability to use Ashley Creek and other water bodies as needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Flowers.
Hello. Hi, Mr. Mayor and council members. My name is Jenna Hoff, and I'm actually a Kalispell citizen coming to talk to you. I live at 161 Buffalo Stage, and I had read an article. I'm always interested in housing policy. I'm a native to Montana, over on the east side, but I moved to Colorado and for about 15, 17 years after college, and saw the effects before my eyes of city sprawl and, zoning regulations keeping an inability to build houses and affordable housing, and then it just goes city sprawl. And Colorado in the Denver area is just one big, huge area. I know Salt Lake City is like that too. So I have a special interest. I'm not a big political person, but I have a special interest in that. And I did read an article that you guys were talking about doing fourplexes in the city by right. And I just wanted to tell you that, from someone, I have a couple of perspectives, but I think that is a great idea. I live behind Edgerton in a single family HOA type situation. And since COVID, I have seen such a decrease in families that are able to move in right by the school, just because of, again, I think it goes down to zoning. We've had a lot of, affordable housing isn't great around here now. But I do feel that if we could allow more middle housing, if we could be able to, I was privileged enough to buy in the early 2000s, and there's a lot of families that can't. And if we don't change our zoning so that we can do some infill and we can do middle housing, I'm very concerned that we're going to end up with that sprawl. And I didn't know this is an argument, but after learning all about septic systems, when you really look at any of our environmental issues, if we can, and there are people that want to live close, they don't want to do cars, they want to be able to, have neighborhood coffee houses and live close to one another. And so I think any density that you can do where there's already infrastructure and there's already density is going to save us from the other fate that a lot of cities have done. So thanks for being our council people. And I really appreciate it. And in the interest of your time, that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Person online, if you please state your name and provide us with your comment.
Hello, Keegan Siebenthaler here, 306 Butler Avenue up in Whitefish. I'm also on the board of Livable Flathead, but I grew up in Kalispell, so did just want to briefly comment. And the first thing I'll say is that I'm here to talk about the second agenda item, but if you do want to connect both agenda items, sort of like what the previous commenter said, the best way to prevent septic pollution in the county is by shifting more development. The average age of a first-time home buyer has risen from 30 to 41. That's just a massive difference in my generation's ability to access housing and to build wealth over time. And I do see one component of that solution, certainly not all of it, but one solution is allowing, in addition to zoning for apartments, allowing development like townhomes and fourplexes that allow gentle infill to do what a starter home used to do. I also really like this form of development being an option because it's accessible to more people. It takes a lot of resources and support to build a mid-rise apartment building, but redeveloping an existing single-family home into something that can serve a few more families is a lot more reasonable for what I'll call like amateur developers, just someone that wants to do it on their own or with the help of a subcontractor or something like that. So I think it can allow more people to kind of be part of the solution to our housing supply issue. So for more specific recommendations, I do hope that City Council will consider adding quadplexes to the low density residential place type in the land use plan, and then also bumping up those densities in terms of units per acre, because you can say you allow fourplexes, but the units per acre can prohibit it in practice. So something like 15 units per acre for that medium density residential zone and 10 units per acre for that low density residential zone. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. Okay. One last opportunity for public comment. Seeing none, I'll close public comment. We'll move into the first agenda item, the county septic regulation update. And I guess I just want to intro this by talking a little bit about why I asked for the work session. Do a little summary. I think we heard some great summary of the issue from some of the public comment. But as we heard in 2004, this rule for pressure dosed septic system was put into place by Joe Russell, who was the health officer at the time. And one of the things from his comment later to the county of one of the big reasons, or one of the reasons that he pushed for it, was the concern of cities. As we heard, our ability to meet water quality standards at our wastewater treatment facility is a concern. And we've talked about this at the council in the past about the problems with septic upstream and that contributing to polluted water when it reaches our system, but we still have to treat the water and to a certain standard despite that. Unregulated use, largely upstream. So it affects us as a city. And, so it's been in place for 20 years. We've seen plenty of development in recent years with it in place, so it's not a huge impediment to development. And when it came before the health board, there was a proposal for kind of an alternative, this idea of a deviation to allow for it. And part of the argument for it was there's just some circumstances where the pressure dose system isn't going to work. And so there was this kind of alternative proposed, but that was not taken up. And one other thing in terms of the city's interest, and again, part of it, we are a city-county health board, so there is some interest there or authority with the city, but also, we talk a lot about, and we talked about with the growth plan when we first started reviewing it, the issue of the cost of developing in the county, right? Present to to the city on the issue, and initial decline on that, we did get an email summary, which I appreciate. I did follow up with our rep and talk to him a bit to get his perspective, and I appreciated that conversation. So I had two questions that I wanted to present to council. One was, given the city's interest in this and the kind of controversy and the concern around it and around water quality, we heard that in the public comment to a certain extent. Does the city want to weigh in with the county with a different perspective than what was the recommendation from the health board? And if so, what would that comment be? And if we did decide to do that, depending on what it is, I did speak with Mayor Mulfield in Whitefish and Mayor Barnhart with Columbia Falls. They expressed a willingness to go to their councils and see if there would be a joint sign-on letter from the three cities. There may be a possibility there. So that's question number one. And then question number two is just generally, not specifically on this issue, but with regards to representation on boards of the city and also our committees, do we want to establish some expectation as to reporting to the council, like annually or something like that? And also when there's controversial issues that come up, that the council be alerted to those issues from our representatives and committees. So those were the two questions I had for council on this issue, and I'll open it up to discussion from the council. Mr. Gavin.
I guess I have a question for staff. What happens today within the boundaries of the city of Kalispell if somebody wants to put a septic system in?
They can't. They have to hook up the city sewer.
Okay, and what if there's an existing septic system in the city that is failing and needs to be replaced?
They need to connect to city sewer in order to do that. There is a formula, it's a cost-based formula, so I don't know, I think it has to cost 3 times more to hook up to city than it would otherwise to hook up into the county, for you not to have to hook into the city.
Okay, yeah,
So essentially, it would have to be very, very cost prohibitive in order not to hook up to the city services.
gotcha. Yeah, I just wanted to, point out that within city limits, we're not allowing septic systems, except for under very unique circumstances where it's going to be 3 times the cost of plugging into or it's going to be 3 times the cost to plug into the city sewage system. I just wanted to point that out because this is definitely a county issue. And I know we're talking about weighing in on that, whether we weigh in on it or not. It's not something that's going to affect people inside of Kalispell as far as this regulation goes, because we're not going to be implementing any of these. We haven't, as long as I've been on council, there's not been one person putting in a septic system. We have recovered a bunch of septic systems that were inside the city. In fact, Morningstar is a great example of that, where we took them off of a bunch of septic systems that were failing, put them on the city's sewer so that the water quality is better. They're like their neighbors. They're in on the city sewer system and all that stuff. And I do definitely understand the problem of we have a water treatment specification for our facility here, our sewage treatment. And we have no control at all about the water quality coming in to the city. The county is not under the same regulations that we are because we're in a certain class of city. We're big enough where we fall under the regulations. The county does not. There's nothing that we're able to do to regulate how the water gets to the city and what quality it is there. But we are required that the outcome of where we dump in from our sewage plant, that is measured all the time, right? So I understand that the difficulty of being able to meet those regulation requirements and stuff like that. I don't like requiring a specific system within a government regulation. And I'm saying a product, not recommending a specific product in a government regulation. We run into this all the time with EPA and DEQ regulations. Basically, they end up being about 10 years old by the time they actually hit and become a regulation. And then they stifle innovation for the product that they're replacing. So there could be a huge advance in gravity septic systems that would be stifled because we're not allowing them to continue in this circumstance. Now, it is happening throughout the rest of the state. We have a different water situation here. We have much more water here than any other county in Montana, pretty much. So with all this, with all this taken into account, our only option really is a resolution that we've sent to them, i.e. a strongly worded letter to the county commissioners. And if that's the council's will, that's what we will do. I'm not in favor of doing it at this time because I just don't know enough about this. I've heard from some public comment. I've seen what came from the county health board. I know what decisions in front of the county commissioners. I'm not an expert on any of this stuff. And, we've heard some accounts that basically say some of the data says that the gravity systems aren't as good and some of the data says that they're as good. I don't feel strong enough where I want to actually put my 2 cents in and sign my name to a resolution that goes up to the county on this matter, just because I don't feel like I'm an expert there. If Montana DEQ, who I think is very stringent, is already covering these regulations and approving the septic systems as they go in, I'm okay with that.
And thoughts on representation and kind of reporting to council?
I do believe, so we do hear from the county health board at least once a year, most times more. And that's usually from a representative of the board. It would be nice if it was our representative that gave us that. I do really enjoy our solid waste board member gives us reports all the time. We know exactly what's going on there, right? And believe it or not, that is a very sensitive topic right now with the solid waste. So as things become important, it would be nice to get more frequent updates, but I think a yearly update at the very least to go through here's what happened this year, here's things that are coming up in the next year, that kind of thing is a good idea.
Mr. Leffridge.
I just had a couple questions. First of all, I just want to say thank you to all those that commented. I've learned more about septic systems tonight than I think I have in my life. But the one piece that was interesting to me was the data, or whether or not there's any established data on
Septic in the city limits, but certainly within the Ashley Creek corridor. For example, the Ashley Creek area there by Sunnyside and such, a lot of those are in the county. That even though it's surrounded by a city, they're not city limits, if that makes sense. They're in a wholly surrounded area or something along those lines. So
it does, I think. I'm just looking at this Western Montana's map. I went on their website and you can zoom in. But there's a number of these red sites, which are the potential unpermitted septic system parcels on Ashley Creek, and it is inside of the city limits of Kalispell. So I guess one of my questions is, have we attempted to actually inventory that or see if that is indeed an issue?
not that I'm aware of that we have actually inventoried any septics. That's why we have a policy that when they do fail, they tie into city services. So that would be our methodology, is that when they fail, they would hook up into the city. Otherwise, we can't force somebody to hook into city services. So it'd be whether or not the Morning Star was a good example, whether or not there's extension of services in the area, whether there's grant opportunities available. But certainly it's a component of the growth policy and the land use plan that we're working on, that as those fail, they would have the opportunity to hook into city services. But Yeah, I don't think we've actually inventoried that I recall, or do you remember anything?
not aware of
Within
any of
city
those.
limits, like I said, but this often happens. We had it with, I would have to look at the map you're referencing, but with the CRS or whatever, well, they're in the city of Kalispell. No, they're not. They're in our growth area, they have the same area code, or there's this many short-term rentals within the city of Kalispell. No, they're not. They're actually in the county. So given our, unique city limit boundaries and such, it often gets misconstrued, so I'd have to look at that map. But in general, we wouldn't be documenting those per se. Our policy would be just that when they fail to hook up to city services, so.
All right, thank you.
Go ahead. Nope, you, go for it.
So thank you so much for all the information. I went this weekend and pursued my own information gathering. And that was where I learned about Gallatin County, and I spoke with the sanitarium that supports Park County. I wasn't able to get to Gallatin County, so I went to Park County. And one of the things that really struck me was that the reason Gallatin County is moving towards this, as has already been shared, is that one, the density of the septics, which is different than Park County, which is why they haven't moved there, but they're on their way to do method. So that is where I came to also then looking at from a Flathead Lake, what's unique about this area. We've talked about the amount of surface water. What we haven't talked about is that Flathead Lake is a low nutrient lake. So it's very unique as a lake system, which means it doesn't take much nutrient loading to affect and impair that system. And because I'm in workforce development, I often think from this perspective. And the numbers, I can tell you that of the people who are employed as a result of the resources that we have in that area, both in recreation and guiding, so on and so forth, tourism, the list goes on, it's significant. So it does affect Kalispell in a number of ways, as has already been pointed out. One is the nutrient loading that is already happening in Ashley Creek. That makes it very challenging for us to meet our water quality standards at our water treatment plant. Two, in terms of how we as a community, how many of us are somehow connected with the workforce in terms of the water quality that we depend on for that, and that this absolutely does. And three, I would challenge Mr. Kuntz's email that there is absolutely enough evidence to suggest that the pressure dose systems are indeed, from 2004, a leading cause, I would say, for why we still continue to have the water quality that we have in comparison to what is happening in Gallatin County. They can no longer fish in Gallatin River reliably because of the eutrophication, which is directly related to the nitrates, which is directly related to the septic plumes and some other absolutely other things. But we cannot deny that it's a contribution. The other piece that came out is this idea of the nutrient plumes, that when you have a density of septics, and they on their own are fine, but when you add them all together, which we've just heard is happening, you get nutrient plumes, which we already have on record in this area on the west side. So where I will fall on this is I strongly encourage the council to send a letter to the county to ask that we maintain what we have, and I'd be happy to look at that deviation. That's new for me, so I'd have to think about what that means. I'm still, as Mayor Hunter knows, trying to figure out the difference between a deviation and a variance, so I don't feel like I'm in a strong stance there. But that would be my stance for these reasons. And in terms of representation from our board members, what I would say is I see it as an honor to be able to serve on the solid waste board, and also my responsibility as a result to maintain connection and communication with my colleagues here so that they make the best and most informed decisions. And the more information we have, the better. So I would argue that particularly in this time when we have a decision that affects so many people, in so many ways, that we do have an opportunity to communicate directly and in a timely and frequent fashion. At those times, perhaps, maybe not as frequently when things aren't happening, but in this case, I would have really appreciated an in-person conversation.
Mr. Nunley.
Thank you, Your Honor. I think I kind of agree with Sid on this topic, though. And I wholeheartedly agree. There is a whole lot of information out there. I've found other information information that contradicts that, but, right? It's kind of like engineers. Everyone's an engineer right up until the point they got to put that stamp on there. But where I look at this is as a city, where our jurisdiction of where our authority lies, right? And it does come down to within the city. I don't feel if we start following and running after all of these things, pretty soon our city staff is going to be so enthralled with so many topics coming at them that they're not going to be able to effectively manage the city, right? And that's where I kind of get a little bit concerned in that are we going outside of what our scope as a city council is, right? And I agree that I would love to see cleaner coming in from Ashley. I'd love to see it in Stillwater. I'd love to see it in Whitefish River. I'd love to see it in Flathead River, right? But we have our jurisdiction on what our authorities are within the city of Kalispell itself. So as far as the representation on this board or any other board, I would hope that we're hearing that information back. But as far as hearing an official from health department, I want to hear it from the directors, right? Because ultimately they're the ones that are on that hook. So just kind of my thoughts on that. So,
Mr. Walker.
Yeah, I appreciate everybody's comments so far and all the public comment. It's been a lot to take in. It's been a lot of information over the last week too about all this stuff. But I've always thought that our water quality was of vital importance to our valley. It's been a big issue to me in water conservation and making sure we preserve what we have and making sure we take care of what we have. I think our duty is to the health of our community as city council, and I think this directly affects the health of our community. We have potential for, increased contamination of our, as you mentioned, unique water sources, the low nutrient water sources, the very shallow water sources in a very constrained area with a whole lot of surface water. It's extremely concerning to me. I would absolutely be in favor of a resolution to the county. I would be in favor of stricter standards for water quality. The level 2, I would certainly be in favor of looking at it and seeing what it takes and seeing if it's too cost prohibitive. I understand, but it's something we should look at. Our water is too important. There's not much else we have that's more important than our water quality, quite frankly. So I fully support a resolution to the county in support of keeping the existing regulations or strengthening them. And as far as reporting, I too would much rather hear it straight from the horse's mouth, as it were, to make sure that what is on paper is actually what they believe, and they can answer questions, because I have some questions that I would rather have out in the open. But it is what it is. But I would certainly like to hear from all our representatives on all of our boards at least once a year, and certainly more often if something else is coming up.
Ms. Gabriel.
Thank you, Your Honor. I am conflicted. In my other life, I'm a conservation educator. I actually go into schools and teach kids about the importance of protecting their environment and why you don't litter, why you pick up your trash, why you don't throw things in the ocean or throw them into lakes. So that's a very personal thing to me. I'm a scuba diver, and I want to cry when I see what we're doing to our oceans and to our lakes. Everything I know about septic systems and anything environmental health related, I've been on council since 2003. So I learned everything from Jill Russell, and there's nobody out there that can do a more thorough job educating you on all of that. And so I have followed Joe's advice over the years, and then Hillary would come after that and would also tell us what was going on. So the reporting back to me is important. It's not as important who it is so much as it's someone who knows the topic. So I do think it's important. I don't really care if it's the health department director, the president of the health board, or who that person is. But I do think they should come each year, and typically they have. Interesting conversation over the weekend with my neighbors. You guys know I live up in Northridge. My neighbor has a septic system in his backyard that he had no idea was there. So they're out there. They decommissioned it, so don't think they're not there, because apparently they are, even in where I live. I kind of feel like again, my personal opinion is that this is a step backwards for the county commissioners to pass this resolution. Do I think we should send them a letter suggesting a resolution? No, I don't think we should. I think that's out of our jurisdiction. I think it's a great idea to partner with the other two cities, and if they're willing to write a passionate letter suggesting they rethink this and that perhaps we would want to do a better job protecting our water for future generations, why would we want to take what we have and step back and go the other direction? I could be totally on board with that. I also think it's important that we remember that pretty quickly the tables are going to be turned, and we're going to be faced with what are we going to do with all of our biosolids when the county's full and we can't send them there anymore. So politically, I think we need to be very careful, very cautious, use our words carefully, and make a plea to make a positive, keep things the way that they are and not lessen our standard. I think that's it. Thank you.
Mr. Fisher.
I waited to open my mouth because I'm still learning. And I think Carrie said it very well. I'm conflicted. I'll take on number 2 first, the representation. I too appreciate hearing from you, but having a board that I worked for years, we preferred to send in myself or a county attorney if it was a legal issue. So like Carrie, I've heard from Mr. Russell when he filled back in as temporary. We've heard from other staff members. I kind of like that because one board member is not supposed to represent the entire board's thoughts. I mean, I get you reporting, but to come speak publicly and testify on a vote that was made, I think it's very important to have that department head come in. Anybody certainly can make a phone call. I talked to Mr. Coons this week and just trying to educate myself a little because I feel way behind on this. And that would bring up my second point. I respect some of these people that have testified tonight, and I care so much about, I'm a fisherman, outdoorsman. I kind of sound like Carrie here. I backed out of a property purchase because there was a campground going in just above the lake. I didn't want to deal with that, but I am not professional enough to sit here and say what I think we should do. I care, I certainly care, but I think we should leave it up to people who took countless hours and months of testimony and came up with an overwhelming vote on what they did. And let's let the commissioners see what they do. Maybe they're gonna do something that changed what they did in Whitefish. Once again, let the process take its place a little more, I think, before we start getting, I kind of agree with Carrie. Let's see what the other cities do. I think they're hearing this. I mean, they're going to do their homework. Their press is here. They're going to see that we're concerned. But I just think we need to stay in our own lane a little bit at times too. Most times we do a dang good job of reaching out to these areas that weren't hooked up, the place down off of South Woodland, and your staff works hard to make sure we work with them on grants to get them hooked up to the system. I think that's our role, is to really push for that, push education, but to start telling other entities or boards what we should do. It would be like me coming to the landfill and all of a sudden think I know everything about biosolids, which I don't. You're certainly learning about it. But again, I didn't even know a lot that took place. I think we have our place. I agree with Mr. Nunnally on staff time. We could create 2 or 3 more positions to start looking ahead and spending more money when it's not our responsibility yet. We know we're going to bring them on when they come in. I'm concerned about Ashley Creek and what's coming in, but my understanding with my tour of the plant is we're state of the art, and we've done several upgrades since then to make sure that we're ahead of the game and always seeking more grant money or more improved equipment to deal with waste. I appreciate so much, and I've learned a lot, but I just think we need to stay in our lane, and I want to hear from a department head who is the paid gun instead of some volunteer when it comes to things like this. And maybe that's 2 things I'd request. If we're going to make a decision, I would rather hear from the department head of the health department, and I'd rather wait to see what the commissioners do before we get outside our lane. That's where I stand.
Mr. Dowd.
Thank you, Your Honor. Yeah, I don't want to take any of my previous comments. I don't want any of them to be misconstrued. We battle septic systems here on council all the time, and it's a huge win for us when we have somebody that's on the fringe of the city, their septic system fails, and we bring them onto city services and get rid of that septic. It's a huge win for us. We look forward to that each and every time it happens, and it's almost like a little high five up here when we can replace one of those. So I'm fully still behind that effort. And the other thing I just like to caution everybody about is with the Montana Land Use Plan and with this subject here, when we talk about going over and above what the regulations are out there, one of the unaffected, unintended side effects of that is that you end up raising the cost of housing overall, right? So I don't know exactly what this is doing county-wide as far as the cost, but I mean, all of us have to play our part, not just the city, but the city, the county, the other cities involved here in the valley. We all have to kind of support each other to find ways to bring down the cost of housing, and that's why I'm very cautious when we come up to anything that could raise costs, even if it's outside of the city. High tide raises all boats, right? So, yeah, I just wanted to throw those comments out there as well, because I forgot to add them on initially, but I am like super thrilled every time we eliminate a septic system here in the city. So, part of that enthusiasm is, or I don't want that enthusiasm to not spread to the rest of the council. We love it when we do that. And if we can bring more systems into city sewer along Ashley Creek, the better for us, because we'll be eliminating a contamination source that previously we had no control over. Thanks.
Let me check if Mr. Waterman wants to jump in. Mr. Waterman, do you have any thoughts?
Sure, I have a couple thoughts. Thank you, Mayor and Council. I have been on the health board before, so I've been part of these conversations historically. They are very complicated. I actually had a chance to talk to Mr. Kuntz. Do wish that as a community, we actually talked and had a lot more awareness of this. I think Mrs. Blank shared the other issues that are around biosolids and stuff like that. There is a component that it would be good for the community as a whole to be more aware of the unique situations in the Flathead with a high water table and where we are when it comes down to these wastewaters. When it comes down to when I was previous on the health board, so within about 5 years ago, we talked about these regs. At that time, there was no conversation about removing the shall not have gravity systems. So that was not a conversation 5 years ago. This is newer. Again, had the chance to talk to Mr. Kuntz about that, and do understand that, you know, the other quality of the Flathead is that we're a very large county. So those extreme places like up in Polebridge were some good examples of where there might be systems or where gravity fed does qualify. In this other parts of the state, there are more uses of gravity fed systems. So that all said, it's a very complicated issue. Appreciate all the long work that Mr. Kuntz did. I think it was great that he sent us a letter. I agree with everybody else on the on council. It would be great if we had these reports coming in from the department head went on a regular basis. And then I do think that sometimes when a council representative like Mr. Kuntz sees a big vote like this coming up, it would be worth an email, just a heads up, so that we're not reactionary, but maybe if there is any feedback that we needed to have beforehand. When it comes down to a letter and stuff like that, I do agree with the idea that if there is any interest in the joints conversation with the other cities, I'd be supportive of that. But I think more importantly, I think if we could find a way to talk about education and heightening education around these issues, I see us too often, you know, as the carrot and the stick. We so often are working on the regulatory or the punitive measures on this, and we're not leaning into the educational conversations that we can be having and important to be having about the larger systems of why, and I think we've run across this in our land use conversations, why there is great concern with high water tables to have septic systems in the floodplains or neighboring Kalispell. So it's not necessarily in city limits, but there's always a concern. Again, that's why I think that heightening the education around the uniqueness of some of our issues in the Flathead, it would be great to see. And if there's any collaboration with the other cities that we wanted to see about education or a letter to the commissioners, I'd be supportive of that.
Mr. Fisher.
He hit it. I was just going to mention education. People care. Everyone cares about our waters. I think a letter to anybody should say we want to team up in any collaborative effort to educate people. I agree completely with the latest comments. Totally. Thank you, Your Honor.
Sorry, did I?
Ms. Blank.
I guess I was just assuming we would reach out to the other cities, so I am absolutely in favor of of including and having a conversation. The more the information we have, the more we can be sure we're moving in the right direction.
Yeah, I guess I'll just finish this conversation. When I listened to the justification for going away from the current rules, you know, a lot of reliance was on the DEQ4 regulations. And I think as we saw and appreciate the public comment, you look at the DEQ4 regulations and it says the best system is the pressure dose system. So it makes sense to me that we would have, you know, rule that says that's what we want, and then have a deviation for anything where that doesn't work. And then, you know, we go to the next option. And, you know, the fact that, you know, Gallatin County is moving away, thank you for bringing that information, because they're having such problems and they need to increase their level of protection through their septic regulations is important as well. So, you know, I would support, you know, doing a letter. I will note, you know, I'm realizing the timing of a letter with a joint, I'm thinking about the joint city letter, pulling that together. My understanding is they're going to be considering this and voting on it soon. It may not be practical to be able to, are you going to mention the date that they're voting on it?
March 17th at 10 o'clock.
Yeah, so that's next week. So, so with a council that I'd say pretty split on it, and the timing, maybe a letter doesn't make sense. But I think we had a good conversation. The press is here, the public had an opportunity to watch. I think the message will be out that there's significant concern at the city level about this. Hopefully moving forward, again, I hope that when there's kind of a important, somewhat controversial issue coming forward, that representatives and people involved can alert us to it. We'd have maybe more time to consider it and see what we might want to do. So those are my thoughts, Mr. Dowd.
Thank you, Honor. This popped into my head right when you were talking about this, and I'm loath to take up any more council time on this county thing, but I do have my one question, I guess, if anybody knows the answer to this: what is the longevity of a pressure system versus a gravity system? Are they about the same? Are they different?
Can we?
Certainly. The longevity of the gravity.
Come up to the mic if you could.
I should know this. Longevity compared to the two systems. It's really hard to say, although the bottom line is you get superior treatment with a pressure dose. It's just been shown that it gives superior treatment. A gravity system is set to fail. It creates a biomass, and it's not doing a full job of treatment. So they do a great job of disposal oftentimes, especially if you're in a very porous soil. All you have to do is get the effluent out a little bit, a short ways, it'll go straight down, and it creates a nitrate plume. So as far as the length, and we've been putting those in pressure dose systems since 2004. Actually, 2005 was when the regulation started. When they are properly taken care of, they are a superior system by far, and they do require a little bit of care. There is no doubt. But did that answer your question? I'm sorry.
Kind of. I was just basically wondering if it was like a 5-year versus 20-year kind of difference or anything like that, or if they're about comparable as far as longevity goes.
I don't think that, although you are going to see the failures in a gravity system. What you're going to do is you're going to see pooling on top of the ground once you have reduced the total length of treatment area of the septic lines. You are going to see pooling on top of the ground. You might see backups into the house, which is telling you that it's time to do something. But by the time you see that, you've already you're no longer treating your sewage. It's already too late. So when you get to a point where you have a backup or whatever in your house with a pressure dose system that can be relieved, it's designed to be relieved by cleaning out your distribution lines.
Okay. Yeah, and I apologize, Your Honor, for taking up more time on this. I just was super curious.
Well, what's interesting about this, and I'll say really quickly, is that we have people on the Board of Health that have no idea of how a septic system works. And they got a real dose of what it is in a very short time. So yeah, I totally understand. I would also thank you very much for listening to your discussions. I'll carry that back with me back to the city of Columbia Falls. I think very good discussion. Thank you for allowing me to come before you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Yes, Ms. Mike.
Just want to add one thing, that we do know that gravity systems perform extremely poorly in steep environments. And so I do think that's important to think about, given our topography, which is largely steep in most of these areas. So it's something to think about as well. And that's been well documented.
All right, so we'll move on to the second item on the agenda, Kalispell Land Use Plan, Planet 2045 Draft Review. Mr. Nygren, staff report.
Yeah, Mayor and Council, as you recall, at our last meeting, did get all the way through the land use plan. At the last meeting, PJ has went through and provided some edits, and then certainly looking at kind of just summarizing if there's anything else the council wants to provide as we look at having the public hearing at our next meeting. And with that, I'll turn it over to PJ for a brief presentation.
All right, thank you, Mayor, Council. As Jared mentioned, I was just going to step through some of the changes that were made based on the discussion from the last meeting, see if that's in line with where everybody wants, kind of following the same process as what we did at some of the other ones. The first one is on page 83. And this was something that we added in terms of exploring possibilities for both indoor and outdoor recreational opportunities to serve all residents. I think that came up as like looking at some of the year-round facilities, and that was part of the discussion we had last time. So next one goes all the way down to 124.
I know.
Yeah, hope you can read that as we're getting to it. Yeah. This is where we added back in wood burning stoves. I think the language we had before was kind of more of a general reference to other contributing factors, and this brought wood burning stoves as one of the specific ones that might be in there. Then down to 144. On the future land use map, there's a number of tweaks that we made through there. If you recall kind of what we did with these descriptions, and just for everybody's reference, this is the future land use map, and then there's different land use designations within there, color-coded, and calling out these different types of designations that would kind of lead to whatever the zoning would be that you would apply on those properties. The language that we had in here for describing commercial, neighborhood commercial, the different residential zones, was kind of spread out a little bit through our existing growth policy, but the original language in here is basically just pulling all that together, so there wasn't too much new. But there was some discussion last time about how we might want to adjust some of those as we're moving forward. First one was under neighborhood commercial, and that was there was some discussion about whether a quarter mile, half mile, 1 mile apart. We just kind of took out all of that in terms of the size and distance. And I think that some of those distances really kind of came more into play when you're talking about some of those neighborhood nodes that were out there at some of the individual intersections. Wouldn't necessarily apply to every neighborhood commercial area that you would have. But anyway, we dropped that out just because it seemed like, you know, it didn't really make a difference in terms of where people wanted to see those. Urban mixed use, we kind of expanded that to include, and I would note our existing map, as you can see here, this blue area, you know, it doesn't necessarily follow specific corridors, but you do see some larger areas where that would come around, even though some of the areas definitely are focused on those corridors. So what we did was kind of expand that language a little bit to show that it should be utilized in areas that are appropriate for mixed use, but it would often be used to expand the depth of an urban highway corridor. A lot of the language we had in there was about you know, how you should see those corridors, and then added this language in here when utilized in these corridor areas. But the intent of those changes was to acknowledge that that could be in a broader area than just a highway corridor, whereas the earlier language was more focused on just that. There's also some discussion about the I guess the terminology in the labeling for a couple of the residential zones. Traditionally, we'd said, you know, urban residential and suburban residential. What we did here is just, we've got 3 categories, so high density, medium density, and low density, kind of to distinguish between the 3 without having a label on it per se.
A question on that, just stemming from our public comment tonight about something I hadn't really thought of, but that we can allow for certain housing types that to increase density, but these you know, numbers of dwelling units per acre may not support that. Have we looked at that, whether there's a conflict there between what we're permitting in terms of the housing type and what these, you know, dwelling units per acre would actually support?
To some degree, you know, and we certainly looked at that in terms of the impact that ADUs may have on that. I think that what you would see is this, you know, 7 and 12 and 20, and then actually can step up potentially to 40 in the high density residential, was something that would be reflected in the facilities plans that they've been working on. I don't know if that would make a difference if you really dramatically increase those. So I know that what a lot of the engineering firms are doing that are doing these facilities plans are putting a ratio or a percentage in there of what you might expect to see with ADUs, because, you know, you can say hypothetically, if we've got 100 lots, there might be 100 ADUs, but chances are there's only going to be a couple. And that's played out with the numbers that we've actually seen since we've allowed ADUs more explicitly over the last 4 or 5 years. We've averaged like 1 or 2 a year that have gotten permits. So we didn't want to jump in there too much with bumping things up. And I think that would probably be true to an extent with some of these densities you'd see in here too, is that you wouldn't want to all of a sudden jump it up to a much higher level because of what you may see in some limited situations with that. Say the other thing that you would notice with some of this too is that sometimes it's easy to say, oh, you take an acre and it's 43,560, you divide it by what your lot size is, and that's your density. That's not really the way that it would typically play out, because you've got roads, you've got stormwater, you've got parks, you've got all sorts of things like that that come into play. And a lot of the projects that we've seen that have come in that people feel are pretty dense are actually pretty close to 4 units per acre. 7 is really almost doubling what we've traditionally had there, because we've dropped some of those lot sizes down to 4,500 square feet. In this plan, we kind of talked about it last time, one of the housing strategies is reducing lot sizes by 25%. So 15, 20 years ago, we were at like 7,000 square feet through most of our residential zones. We dropped that down to 6,000 square feet about 15 years ago or something like that. And then this housing strategy would drop that again to 45. But 7 was kind of a number that we looked at. We kind of did some typical layouts of what you might see, you know, with a real efficient layout, you know, while still kind of acknowledging that, you know, ADUs and other types of mixes in there may bump that somewhat above that in some situations.
So I guess that's my question that I didn't realize until this comment, and that I thought the dwelling units per acre was more of a descriptive rather than a regulatory. So if we allow ADUs or whatever, and that comes in and for an application, and it bumps the dwelling units per acre for that, I don't know, zone, that neighborhood above the 7 dwelling unit, are we going to deny that ADU?
No, if the zoning allows it, then that's fine.
Yeah.
You know, what you're doing is, you know, if somebody's coming in and they want to annex, you know, 50 acres or something and do a project there, you know, whether you're looking at a PUD or a subdivision, you want it to be substantially compliant with what your land use plan is. You know, yeah, there wouldn't be a building permit coming in and saying that you would deny it on that basis at all. You know, and then if, you know, people can always come in and you can do a land use map update as well if there's a project that's not in line with that is, and do that analysis. So I don't really see that as a particular issue here in practice.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so the next one down here was 152. And so this is in the housing strategies, and this kind of ties into what you were just mentioning about potentially allowing fourplexes. And the 8 strategies that were listed were the specific ones that you know, Planning Commission looked at and were recommending. You wouldn't necessarily have to have something listed in here as a housing strategy to adopt it eventually, because these are all adopted through the zoning ordinance. And again, as you kind of mentioned, this isn't a regulation, it's just guiding what the regulations would be. And there's, anyway, we added this language in here about additional housing strategies may be included in the zoning regulations at the council's discretion. So that would be taking something through as, you know, a general zoning update if that was a direction that council wanted to go. I would kind of note, just to clear up any confusion, because sometimes terminology can get a little bit difficult with fourplexes. You know, the language that's in the housing strategy is a fourplex is a true. It's like one building with 4 apartment units. It's not 4 townhomes in a row, because townhomes are separate structures that just have 0 setback that butt up to each other. And we allow townhomes with fairly large configurations in all of our residential zones. Don't necessarily allow a fourplex or a triplex as a single building with that. So nomenclature is important in making those distinctions on that. But since we were talking about that as a potential strategy in here, just so everybody's clear as to what that would be. But bottom line is, we did add that line in here about making it clear that, you know, if we get to year down the road or later this summer, whatever the case is, and council wanted to go in that direction, there wouldn't be anything in the land use plan that would prevent council from doing that.
And I appreciate that language. I think, so I did want to just step through some of the reasons why, I think it's important that we include this. And then, there were some council members not present last week, so maybe we can check in with everybody again on this. But, a big, and I apologize to, take some time out for this, but I do think it's important. The reason why the state legislature passed these bills and asked the city to revisit this is the affordable housing issue. And we've done a good job at the city to approve new units, to try to increase that supply, to bring down housing costs and make housing more affordable. And we'll see as those get built out. I think that it's had some impact, stabilizing prices already. We'll see how much it brings it down. But of course, even with the modest growth we're having, we need 500 units a year to stay even with the growth. And so if you fall behind, even if we catch up now, you could easily fall behind. So it's important to have the flexibility of increasing that supply over time, and that missing middle. That's what they call this. It's not the single family home on one end, and it's not the big apartment complexes on the other. It's a missing middle, provide kind of additional flexibility and options for folks and increasing supply for housing. And I think it's really important component. As we heard in public comment, it allows for that small scale developer to participate as well. There's only maybe half a dozen developers who have the capital come in, buy land, and develop hundreds of units at a time. And they're very plugged in with the market, and it's very time intensive. You get it passed, and it'll take years before it gets developed out. Allowing the ability for these individuals to come in with not nearly as much capital, buy a lot, and build a small scale residential units beyond a single family home, I think provides more diversity in the market and allows for some folks to get in and help provide the supply that we need, expanding that kind of developer community in our community. Obviously, it's less sprawl. Every unit that isn't built in infill is going to go out on these big new developments that are impacting our open space, our agricultural land, and potentially out in the county and affecting our water quality on septic, as we were talking about tonight. So getting as much infill is important. We talked about less city expenditure. Those big developments on the outskirts, you have to extend the services, extend the water and sewer line, have police and fire driving further out to provide those services, our plows, our garbage trucks, everything else. The more infill we can have, the better it is for our taxpayer. Having more of our population, our growing population, be where folks are residing already, where the water and sewer already exists, where the police and fire is already patrolling and providing services and so on. So it's economically efficient and it's fiscally responsible. It supports neighborhood businesses. We've talked about the value of having businesses that are within walking distance that create a more cohesive neighborhood. You need density to support those businesses. If you have neighborhoods that consist of primarily single family homes, you may not have the density of people to be able to support that kind of neighborhood business. So you need a mix of housing that includes higher density in a neighborhood to support that. I believe there's value in having mixed income neighborhoods. That I have neighbors, I've spoken about the fourplex next door to me. I have an eightplex across the street. I have friends in those buildings that are of a different socioeconomic class that I may never have met and have the opportunity to know if I didn't live in a neighborhood with mixed housing types. And I'm better off for it because I can understand the situation they're in that's different from my own, maybe economically and kind of the experiences they have. And on the reverse side, we know the negative impacts on our community from concentrated areas of low income. That's been documented across the country, where when you don't allow the mixed income kind of all over the community, then inevitably you're concentrating the rental units on the commercially zone, which is a much smaller area, and that concentrates that low income folks in neighborhoods, and that has a negative consequence for those areas. We've heard talk about property rights, you know, folks with regards to the crane, talking about property rights. We had a conversation last week about takings and whether, you know, 40-acre zoning is a takings. Well, you know, allowing more options for property owners to build what they want, that's a property rights issue as well. There's concern that it was spoken to by staff that if we open this up, all of a sudden I'm gonna have a fourplex next to me, there's gonna be a fourplex there, my neighborhood's totally gonna change. There's been plenty of communities in recent years that have adopted these types of changes, and what they find is that this happens very slowly over time. And what happens is people think of the worst case scenario, they think of that house that they love in their neighborhood, that's gonna get torn down and there's gonna be a fourplex. The reality is developers are looking to maximize the difference between what they pay and what they are going to get in return. And so they're going to target the least valuable property, which is typically going to be the property that's an eyesore in the neighborhood, the house that's a rundown, in bad condition. A lot of folks in the neighborhood are going to be thankful that that house in the neighborhood got replaced with something new and improved. You know, they envision their favorite house being torn down, when in fact it's the house that most folks would like to see replaced with something better. The polling we saw from the public with Livable Flathead supports the fourplex. We did get that email from the folks that did the polling to explain their methodology. And I think given the fact that they did target specific demographics to make sure it matched our community, which is something as I appreciate all the public input and the public process and the shreds and the going to Sykes Diner and stuff, but I do think a poll that specifically makes sure that the demographics match the community is going to probably have some better representation there in terms of public opinion on that. So ultimately, a lot of reasons why I support this and want to open up and again see if there's council support for including fourplexes. Mr. Fisher.
Your Honor, would this allow me with my 3,200 square foot home to switch it to a fourplex in my neighborhood? It doesn't necessarily mean new building or tearing down the old house. If people could maximize profit instead of renting out their home, or me if I want to rent, could I switch my home into a fourplex?
If it met building code. Yeah, as long as you meet building code, if this were allowed.
Yeah, I think that's one thing when you're talking about allowing a fourplex as right everywhere. You know, basically, you know, it's traditionally we've had a lot of single family zoning in the city, right? It's kind of expanded to a 2-family base. This would expand it to 4, and it would be by right. And so somebody would just come in and get a building permit in that situation. You know, there would be the issue of it would be a different building code. It would go to the commercial code instead of the residential, to the IBC instead of the IRC. You know, a couple of things that would be interesting to see some of that impact is that, you know, there are a number of things that are going on.
And people meeting with these folks, to hear that they were in favor of some changes, but not fourplexes. And I still can't help but go back to when somebody buys their East Side Charmer home, and they buy it under that situation of a neighborhood and not for fourplexes. I get it for new developments. I totally support that. I love what you all did even before I came on council with mixed use up past whatever subdivision that is up north. I can't even think of it right now. Silverbrook, thank you for being my brain. So I get that in new developments, but when I still maintain when people buy near a neighborhood that they like, and there could be a fourplex by it. And I owned a triplex right across the alley and brought in a lot of good people, helped a lot of people with reasonable rent. Wish I owned it today. It's worth a heck of a lot more money. But I get the whole thing, but it was there. I purchased it that way. And I think that there's that right of people not to have, I love the old home being torn down, but I don't like the idea of me being able to capitalize and switch my place over to a triplex or a fourplex, put in a couple more entries with no parking requirements maybe now, and switch the neighborhood dynamics that way is what bothers me. But I support infill. I support new homes or homes that somebody can tear down one and build a nice fourplex. Talking to Dustin the other day, sometimes you don't even really know they're there. They're such a fabric of the neighborhood, and it is good for neighborhood business and walkability. I love that, but I don't like the potential of conversion. And then the fourplex owner, to be affordable, can come in and take my $800,000 home and sell each unit for $250 to capitalize a little more. It could actually have a reverse effect if somebody was really thinking it through, because by God, somebody could afford to purchase, I could sell those fourplex units and actually make it more expensive than selling to some family and maybe giving them a good deal, $50,000 less than what I think. So it could have a reverse effect in some ways too, with people trying to capitalize on it. But I thought you did a really good job presenting your thoughts on it. I get infill. I just don't like converting and changing older neighborhoods. And I think we are accepting a lot of surveys from people that we really should be seeking them. You know, I got to tell you, I get these surveys on politicians. When they don't hear what I have to say, oh, we've already filled our quota and goodbye. So my trust and value, and I heard Wes, you say too, 600 people is a good survey number. I think what we hear in our neighbors and people that have reached out to me about this conversation is my good numbers. The people are my good numbers. I don't know who they were. I don't know who conducted the survey. I don't know if they did cut them off like I get cut off whenever they don't want to hear what I have to say. So these surveys that are just randomly coming in, I put more value on my neighbors than a survey that was randomly done. That's it.
Mr. Leftridge.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've mulled on this a lot since last week, following our discussion, and I first went back into the public comment data inside of the survey, and the best survey that I could find was on page 241 of our packet, and where it was asked, there was only 43 people that were surveyed, and it asked whether or not people were in favor of having apartments of 3 to 4, which I think is kind of a bit of a misnomer. I think that apartments just kind of have a connotation of a much larger facility. But the results were, of those 43, 16 in favor, 22 against, and 5 didn't have an opinion on it, which is pretty close. But looking at the comments in favor of these, the comments in favor, and this was just not only the survey, but also the text commentary that went along with it too, was people were in favor of incremental growth, they were in favor of mixed density neighborhoods, and they were in favor of avoiding outward sprawl, and those were very common comments. The opposition to apartments inside of neighborhoods were neighborhood quality and character, property value erosion, and some fundamental questions on whether or not increased density actually contributes to less affordability, which, you know, that's probably more of an academic study than we can get into right now. But paired with the survey that we were provided, I actually do think there is significant support in our neighborhoods for continuing to have mixed development and mixed density development. but I also take very seriously the concerns about neighborhood quality and character. But first, I don't think there's any doubt that if you go walking around the east side of Kalispell or the west side of Kalispell, that there's some great opportunities for redevelopment that would very much increase the quality of our neighborhoods. And I think that providing an incentive to do so for developments, for people that are interested in developing some of these neighborhoods, I think that that's good. But we also don't want these developments to be out of place in our neighborhoods, because we don't want these large developments going in instead of, you know, these nice neighborhoods that we have. So ultimately, I am supportive of the inclusion of 3 and 4 plexes, with a caveat that the accompanying zoning regulations have things included. And I'm not coming with specific recommendations, but the things that I would like to see is being able to control bulk, and having appropriate form standards for some of these buildings that would make it so it is better integrated into our existing neighborhoods. To ensure that we're keeping our yards and trees. I mean, ultimately, those are the things that people care about in terms of quality of our neighborhoods. We just have a fourplex that takes up 95% of the lot with no setbacks, take down all the trees and pave over the entire thing. Obviously, that's going to be a huge detriment to our neighborhoods. But if we have it in the same footprint, and we have the same trees, the yard space, again, many of the fourplexes that exist now, we don't even know they are because they just already integrate into our neighborhoods. I'd like to put some controls for parking and curb cut impacts. Again, those are quality things that I think that we can control for. And all of this can be done well to minimize the impact of our neighborhoods and increase the affordable housing and development inside of our neighborhoods.
Mr. Nunn.
Thank you, Your Honor. Sorry I didn't make it last week. I was out of town and I had every intention of trying to zoom in, but by the time I got back to the room, it was 9 o'clock and I thought, oh, they'll be done. Nope.
Still here?
That's what I hear, so sorry about that. As far as it comes from a fourplex standpoint and doing it by right, here's my concern, and I'm going to ask some questions of staff just because I have some concerns with this. I think I know this answer, but let me hear it. How do we calculate the number and the size capacity for water, sewer, all of that when it comes to, let's say, the east side of Kalispell? Is there a calculation that we use to calculate the size for capacity of water and sewer?
Are you talking about in terms of a facility plan, so looking at the whole?
Yep.
Probably be better asked Public Works on that specifically, but certainly when they're looking at sizing lines as part of that facility plan, you know, where certain mains should go, looking at the potential density that could be on that system would be a factor that they would go in there. So when they were putting together, as I'm sure that you're aware, you know, they've been working on this update that will be coming in front of you guys before too long. Early on in that process, they looked at our growth boundaries, both the annexation boundary and the overall growth policy area, looked at the potential densities that might happen in there. So it is a significant factor in putting those facilities plans together.
So
we added a factor for infill with ADUs and knowing that the duplexes and triplex were coming, knowing that it's not going to happen just overnight.
Sure.
Because you don't want to, hypothetically, this was kind of we've added a bit of a factor for infill, but.
Okay. And have we taken into the factor of the parking if we do no off-street parking?
We did not. So we have, I mean, it's just something that's before us with state law changes. Any unit less than 1,200 square feet is not going to require parking. So a fourplex on a city lot of south 7,000 square feet, likely, if they would have the option to do no parking. And the reality is we don't have public transportation. Everybody here owns a car. You could end up with 8 cars on a city street. So I'm playing like city services scenario here, right? I just putting it out there, not speaking one way or another, but a street filled with cars is very hard to plow, provide services, and do emergency services. So, yeah, one off here or there likely is not going to be an issue, but if it did gain a lot of steam, it'd be very challenging for the city if we were to look out 20, 30 years. And, certainly that would be something other councils would have to adjust to, but that would be something that we're very concerned with, is just the ability to provide services. And I mean, it's hard now when on certain block faces when the street is filled with cars, so.
So then my other concern then, we do this and yeah, it doesn't happen often, but we just pave 3rd and 4th east. And now somebody wants to put in a duplex even. We're gonna be cutting that brand new asphalt to put in that pipe every time somebody does that all the way down, right? We're gonna be
Going
making
down the
those
streets, I would
cuts.
guess probably not. So if you're, part of it would depend upon the development that's happening there. So what our rule is in the city is that if you've got, whether it's a duplex or a 4-plex or a 24-plex, there's one service that comes in and goes out, right? Where you would have additional ones coming in would be if you have an ADU situation, if you got the garage convert in the back, because each one of the buildings would have a separate line. And of course, typically sewer would go to the alley and then water to the street. So, yeah, it would kind of depend upon some of those certain situations, but the conversion of a single family house to a duplex wouldn't necessitate a new line. But
But if they did an ADU instead,
conversion of the garage,
then
it would. Yeah. So.
And in a lot of those projects like that, when the new water main was installed, they installed the meter pits, which are then already outside of they're in the boulevard, so they wouldn't necessarily need to connect in. It's all gonna depend on, PJ's, a townhouse actually will, because it's individual ownership, right? So you're gonna have to have individual water and sewer mains. A 4-plex actually can be one water
sewer.
and sewer,
Okay.
because it operates more like an HOA, whereas, as long as they can meet, the water flows and things, they would be able to do that.
So then Jed made a comment that if it, all of a sudden it condoized sometime in the future, then they could sell those. Is that a possibility?
Yeah, because doing a condo isn't considered a subdivision. You just do a unit ownership act, and you do a declaration that you record and breaks that down. We don't have, as far as our code standards are, there's no difference between a 4-plex or a 4-unit condo building. So somebody could come in and do that. It would just be a matter of filing the paperwork with the clerk and recorder.
And then that we would have then 4 meters go onto that building.
No,
Four.
it
It would still be one.
Still
It
just
would
the
just
one.
be like run by an HOA, essentially like a condo association. I guess the other side, I think one argument, just getting into nuances of being in the planning department, is, well, 4-plex is gonna be renters in a neighborhood, right? But, so you could argue that going condo and ownership is an option that is good, because then it's not renters and they are bought into the neighborhood as well. Just another.
So I guess one of the things that I look at is so my father lived out in the Seattle area, not in Seattle proper, but all those communities around it, and further out into the suburban area from what even those larger little towns around Seattle were. It was frustrating to drive around and go try to find an address, because they did this a number of years ago, and all of a sudden, where it used to be just a normal neighborhood, single family, now there's 3 houses on one city lot in those situations with different addresses, and it gets really confusing, and it certainly completely lost the feeling of the neighborhood in that situation. I'm honestly a little bit frustrated that the state is even saying that there is no single family by right, it's duplex at this point, with the state talking of in the next session to go to 3-plex or triplex or quadplex. I can't support tri or quadplex just because it does change, it ultimately changes the community, that neighborhood just too much. I think of that east side. You're right, we can't always think of that. What a travesty of the Keith House or the Himsel House or any of those properties. All of a sudden, they may not go that route, but if all around them, all of a sudden they are fourplexes. And you're right, could be years down the road, travesty years down the road anyway, right? And so I can't support fourplex or triplex. When I talk about private property rights, it's not just the private property right for me to do whatever the heck I want on my piece of property. But in a city, our private property rights is also protecting and making sure that our neighbors ensure their private property rights are still protected. And with that, I use this example with a number of folks. Let's just say that you really like to have a garden in your backyard. And you live on the middle of one of these city blocks. And all of a sudden your neighbor to the south of you goes, you know what, I think I want to do a ADU, or I want to do a quadplex. And we're going to be able to build up 35 feet high with very small setbacks when you consider that. And the neighbor to the north goes, yeah, they're making some good money on that. So I think I want to do that same thing. Have we protected that property right of the person in between that likes to garden and all of a sudden there's no sun coming to the house, to the property? Did we protect that? I think we also have to look at that a little bit, right? We are trying to protect the community as much as we can, right? And for that reason, I can't support tri or quad within any existing. Wholeheartedly support it in new going forward, because now you're buying into a neighborhood that that's the possibility. But in existing, I can't. We would be pulling the rug out from underneath people with the property that they've built and lived in and want to be there. So for that, I can't support going to tri or quad. Duplex hurts enough, especially in some of these neighborhoods. So, thank you.
Mr. Dowd.
Thank you, Your Honor. I have a little bit here. First off, a couple questions for staff. Today, if you live in one of those neighborhoods, you could have a fourplex with a CUP. Is that correct?
Depends upon what neighborhood we're talking about. So if you're looking in R2, R3 today, we allow ADUs, or would allow ADUs because state law requires us to. R4, it's duplexes. If you get into the RA zones, then you could do a fourplex. So when you're talking about the area of downtown, it's not all the same zone. So some areas, yes, you could do with a conditional use permit with 1 unit per 3,000 square feet. Other zones, you might be currently limited to a duplex under current rules.
Okay,
You
and
could do attached townhouses.
You could do attached townhomes. And again, that was a distinction that we drew there too, is that townhomes that attach single family, they're separate standalone structures just with zero setback.
so that would be attached townhomes more than 2?
You could be potentially, yes.
Okay.
Could be, but as part of that, we do look at the density, so it should be comparable to the neighborhood.
So
Right. And there
There's
was,
like a minimum lot size and things that would go along with that. But yes, you could, even in a R2, R3 now, you could do 3 or 4 attached townhomes, but you would still have kind of the larger kind of base lot size that would go along with it. So it'd just be a different building type.
Okay, and post Montana Land Use Plan adoption, that CUP would actually be administrative, is that correct?
correct. So the public notice is kind of interesting on both with CUPs and with subdivisions, just because of the status of the Made lawsuit out of Bozeman and where that goes, and kind of the reaction that the legislature had this last time to put like a 1-year provision for what that would be. So what would be on the books today for something like that would be a public notice that would go out for a written comment period, but not for a public hearing, and then could potentially be appealed up. What the end product is going to depend upon what the state Supreme Court says. Okay. And then eventually what the legislature may or may not do as a reaction off of that. The other twist to that is that one of our, if you look down here at number 8, allowing multi-unit dwellings as a permitted use in all lots where office, retail, and commercial are primary permitted uses, what you'd be seeing is those are the zones that we allow apartments in right now. So the zoning update wasn't going to require a conditional use permit for multifamily in any of the zones where we allowed it in any case.
All right, thank you for answering my questions. Now, on to my comments. So personally, I think everybody, or at least if you've been on council for a while, you know that I am a big believer and I emphasize, group homes, pad split type situations, boarding houses, ADUs, duplexes, renting out a room in your house to provide additional housing and supplementary income. I'm enthusiastic about all of that stuff. I'm also, I don't actually put a whole bunch of emphasis myself on the character of a neighborhood. That's just me. But I put a whole bunch of care and emphasis on representing the people of my ward. Okay. I took great pains over the past week to gather public opinion in Ward 4 about this issue specifically because I had a lot of people reached out to me and I didn't want to just base my decision on the people that reached out. So I reached out as well. I did as much as I could in a week's period of time. And this is what I found. And this is just Ward 4, by the way. So it doesn't encompass the areas you're actually talking about, which are Ward 2 and 3, I think, mainly, right? They are okay with duplexes, and they have to be now because the state's mandated them. So there you go. They were not in for a fourplex is allowed by right, but they were okay with keeping them available with the CUP. So that's what I gathered in the short amount of time that I had available to me. I believe I got a pretty decent cross section. I know a lot of weird people from very low income to very high income and everywhere in between. Okay.
How many people? How many people did you speak with?
2 or 3, maybe. I don't know.
Two,
It was quite a few. I probably had 50 conversations over the last week, and I also did some polling over social media and stuff, which I don't really take to heart that much because in order for them to respond, they have to already see my post, right? So going back to the Livable Flathead study, it was a private study. And the only reason that I don't put a huge amount of stock into it is because the study participants were sourced using social media. And the same response that I got back from the people that were in my sphere of influence is who they were able to get back with their limited sphere of influence. So I'm not totally buying into that's even though they did come from different demographics, I don't totally buy into that's a totally unbiased study. I would love, there are still things we can do within the zoning code that wouldn't be, there are still things we can do within the zoning code that wouldn't be overridden by what we wrote here in the strategic plan. I would not be able to support the Montana Land Use Plan in total if the fourplexes were actually put in there, just because of, how I really feel my ward feels about this specific issue. So long story short, I wouldn't have supported this if it had fourplexes actually spelled out in the strategic plan here. But with the way that staff worded this, it gives us a lot of flexibility in the future, and I like that. So that's my whole spiel. Thanks.
Walker.
Yeah, so appreciate everyone's comments. I'll echo a lot of Mayor Hunter's comments on mixed use and redevelopment of these fourplexes and threeplexes and duplexes. I think ultimately where I come down on this is that we can't avoid change, and no neighborhood can avoid change. And if a neighborhood is not changing, whether it's being renewed or redeveloped or refreshed in some way, it's dying. And it's just a matter of time. And we see it constantly where neighborhoods they're built, they look great, and nothing happens for 40 years, and now they're dilapidated because there's no reinvestment, there's no redevelopment of anything, they just stagnate. And so I have been in favor of adding flexibility to allow people to redevelop their neighborhoods, to turn a flagging property into something that may help them in their own life. Make, you know, as you mentioned, 4 $250,000 condos are significantly cheaper than a $750,000 home, even if you give them a $50,000 discount, right? It's still a $500,000 difference in the cost of a home for somebody, for up to 4 people. And so I am fully in support of giving people the flexibility to make those decisions on their own. I am fully confident that people aren't desiring to destroy neighborhoods and alter their character irreparably, because no one's going to want to live there in that new building if the whole neighborhood hates it and hates them. Like we've talked about this before. Developers want to work with the surrounding neighborhood and the community, and especially a small developer who maybe already lives in that house and knows all of their neighbors would be able to make an informed decision on whether that's a good idea for that neighborhood or not. And I don't want to take that decision away from them with zoning. So I am fully in favor of adding the flexibility and giving people more options so that we can revitalize some of our older neighborhoods. Not just the new development, it's really the older developments that need this kind of changes the most, because that's where we have the most opportunities for people to improve their situations. So I think that's where I come down on this, is that we want gradual change, organic change through the city, instead of sudden huge properties that get dumped on the edges because there's nowhere else to go. And I think there is concern that this will happen too fast, but I don't think it's going to happen too fast where we can't make changes and we can't decide that, oh, no, this is too much, or this is going in a way we didn't anticipate, and we can make more adjustments as long as we leave things open. But I don't want to have to come back if we don't have to. I think we need to give people the flexibility to do what they think is best. So I would support it.
Mr. Waterman? Mr. Waterman, do you have
Sure.
thoughts?
Thank you. I mean, appreciate the comments and the conversation. Again, really, actually, Mr. Dowd, I think you hit it very right. That really appreciate the changes on 152 that the staff has done. I mean, it does leave us that flexibility. Personally, supportive of including fourplexes, because I do think that this is a chance that we're able to make that change, and it is as Mr. Walker said, is giving the flexibility and giving landowners the best choice. So that's sort of where I am. Really haven't changed much from where I was in my position last week on supporting the fourplexes.
Ms. Gabriel?
I do not support fourplexes. I like the way this is written. Let me rephrase that. I support them. I agree with very much of what Mr. Dowd said and what Mr. Fisher said, what Mr. Nunnally said, and part of what Mr. Lethbridge said about them. I think they're great in new developments where everyone knows what they're buying into. I could never go into my neighborhood and say that I'm going to support a fourplex going in, sandwiched into all these single residence places that are there now. And what keeps coming to mind for me is, and somebody else said developers are going to do the right thing. There's plenty that won't. There's plenty that are going to do whatever is going to make them the biggest amount of money. And that would be bulldozing what's there and building some monstrosity of a building. If we could control what the outside of the building looked like, if it still looked like all the, I call them the little McMansions up on the east side that have so much character, that'd be one thing. And Whitefish has done some of that with what they've required in exteriors on some of their buildings and done a great job, I think, of preserving that character. I don't think that needs to be one of the I like the way this is written. Sorry, I'm all over the place there, but
It happens. You know, we do have apartments in our neighborhood already.
I know we do. I have a duplex right across the street from me, and it's great, but it's a duplex.
Garland and Cherry, already there.
I used to live there.
Ms. Blank.
Question for the staff. So the way you've added in the additional housing strategies, just so I'm clear, fourplexes are an option.
They're one of those strategies,
So
yes, of the
this-
14. So as we mentioned, the reason it was written in here, you don't necessarily need to make that decision sitting here tonight. You know, again, just looking at what a growth policy and now a land use plan is just a guiding document to make those regulatory decisions in the future. There's certainly a lot of things that are spread through here in housing about different housing types and having appropriate mixes, that there's certainly enough that you could support doing that change in the future. And yeah, that was the purpose of this language here, was to have that flexibility to add any one of those other housing strategies, not just the fourplexes,
Okay.
if at some point in the future council wants to go there.
So by putting them, go
Sorry,
ahead, I'm
so the way it's written too, it would allow the council to then, because it sounded like there's a bit of a split, there's support if there's standards, and then there's a couple no's. But the way it's written, it would allow the council through a zoning update to allow fourplexes with standards. If you just pick it as an option, it's allowed everywhere a single-family house goes, and that's how we're gonna put it in the zoning.
Well, but this isn't the regulatory. Zoning is the
But-
regulatory, so
but
we can,
it's-
but
It is, but the way this is a bit nuanced, because state law is telling us we have to adopt something, and the option is a fourplex everywhere a single-family home is allowed. So it really is kind of regulatory, because it's coming from the state that you have to put it in your land use plan. That's why it gave you some options. So my concern would be, as soon as you, basically, it's like the duplex. It allows for, let's see here, where's that, PJ?
The specific
Allow as a
one-
permitted use a duplex where a single unit dwelling is permitted. So essentially it'd be saying that same language where every single family home is allowed as a fourplex. But that pretty much just opens it up. When you look at going with, reduce minimum lot size of 25%, reducing the parking standards and all that, it just pretty much kind of eliminates the ability where in the zoning ordinance, if you do it this way, we can kind of separate it out from here and make it kind of its own zoning text update and allow for it with certain conditions, whether it's aesthetics or parking or way, otherwise it gets very convoluted if you put it in here, because it's presumed that you could just do it like we are everything else. That would be our interpretation of that.
with the, number 2 is allowing accessory dwelling units, but we have parameters on what accessory dwelling units are gonna look like and what their size.
No.
No, we don't.
Not really.
And that's also
Put a
dictated by
garden
state
shed
law
in
as
the
well.
backyard.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So like Jared was mentioning here, it's section 7625-302 that lists the specific strategies that are in there. Part of it is that there would be some size parameters on ADUs, but not as a duplex. But that's based on their definition of what, an accessory dwelling unit would be, that's part of there. And I would agree, if we said we are adopting this strategy, there wouldn't be any standards on there. I think out of the 23 legislature, there were some limitations on what cities could do for architectural review. Whitefish, for example, recently got a letter and had to pull back what their architectural standards were on some of that too. Of the 14 strategies, actually are the one that had the least amount of support, at least with the ones that we ranked. I know there's different methodologies out there, but the 14th strategy was reducing design standards when it came to multifamily dwellings. But you'd almost have to do that if you allowed it as a permitted use in what was out there. So, but anyway, bottom line is, I think you can come in later and add those in and include conditions, and that was kind of part of the discussion. If it's listed as one of the strategies, then you would need to include it in just as permitted use, and somebody would have the same right to build that as they would just going and building a garage or a shed or a single-family house.
So it sounds like that's weird, but but it sounds like I mean, it would shock me that the state legislature would say, you know, whatever. To get around, I mean, if we're sitting there and saying, here's the strategies we're selecting, then we can also say, while it's not a strategy we're selecting under the legislation, we do want to allow fourplexes with standards. Like you can
Right,
put
and
that
that's a
in.
direction you can go. So the bottom line is Malupa says you need to adopt at least 5 out of the 14. And once you hit 5, what they do, then you're free to kind of do other things. And
We
so,
already have 5 there, so.
yeah, so there's more than 5 there, but that's the dilemma. If you say this is one of our housing strategies and we're going to adopt this under this section here, then the housing strategy is just as a permitted use. I think that even if we didn't even have this language about additional housing strategies being adopted, council could make the decision as a zoning text amendment to include those, and that would be substantially consistent with the land use plan as a whole, because the land use plan under the housing talks about the number of units that we need, the need for affordable housing. It talks about mixed type of uses. It talks about providing housing types for all levels of the community. It talks about aging in place. So there's already a lot in there where you could say that adopting that as a zoning text amendment would be substantially consistent with the land use plan. It doesn't have to be a ninth housing strategy that's listed in here.
I'm sorry to hijack, but you got me on a number of questions of it, because this is new to me. I didn't. Does the law require that in our land use plan we reference their law and say we're selecting these? In other words, this section could say reference law and then say the implementation of this plan should include the following, changes to zoning. And say we're not. It's not the strategies. It's like options that we're selecting, and so you kind of get away from linking it to the legislative
Right.
strategy.
I think we wanted to be crystal clear when we were drafting this, because when you're looking at a couple of the core changes really under Malupa, one is the housing strategy. Well, one is that the land use plan takes a little more focus on housing. One of the real specific changes is adopting one of these specific housing strategies. And the third is all the procedural stuff that we've kind of talked about that we don't really know what's going to look like in the end anyway. So we just wanted to be really crystal clear that we are complying with Malupa because we're adopting these, and to give specific direction on incorporating those into the zoning regs. So when we drafted the zoning reg updates and took those through the public hearing, it was really tied to getting under Malupa both procedures out of the code and the housing strategies that are out of here. And again, that doesn't limit you from going in some other directions, especially if you wanted to, say, allow triplexes and fourplexes with certain design parameters. You would be better off doing that as a standalone zoning or part of a larger zoning update, as opposed to listing it as a strategy and saying it's one of the housing strategies we're adopting.
Okay. So, yeah, I mean, I would just, I want to be clear in the process, the direction the city's going. So if we have support that we're willing to do fourplexes, even with, some sideboards, standards, whatever, that if we don't list it here because of that concern, we somewhere, another paragraph, we say we are going to do fourplexes with looking at design standards. But I acknowledge too, even if we don't, that in a few weeks we could, as we do the zoning process, right?
Whether it was in a couple weeks or, at any point in time, council, we do zoning updates all the time, whether it's, and not just from the public that might have a petition, but, if council as a whole wanted to go in a certain direction, we can do those zoning updates and bring that through as something that's initiated by the city.
Okay. Sorry, Ms. Plank.
That's okay. That was very helpful for me. So I think I'm tracking, but let me check in. So important. And without design standards, you do run into the problem of it not fitting in with the neighborhood. Without design standards, you do run into not having setbacks or the landscaping that really incorporates that fourplex into the neighborhood, no matter, and what they also said is, if you only do it on new development, then that makes a very big change in the community itself, and it prioritizes some communities over others in terms of diverse structures. So it's important, what I learned is to have that option in both areas, but with design standards, so you maintain and have that option to regenerate, as you were speaking. So I learned that, which gave me a lot to think about. clearly fourplexes are going to enhance our septic and sewer, and you already heard me speak on that, so obviously that tracks. The other thing that I learned is that a lot of the cities have adopted ordinances that for fourplexes to work so well, because fourplexes are unique in that, as it's been stated, I can get a loan residential, not commercial, so it opens up a very different situation. Out of state property owners in particular. And so what they have done is they've done ordinances where yes, you can be an out-of-state property owner, but you need someone in the community to help manage that property so it maintains its commitment to the community. And as well, that there's a registration. So if there are issues with that property and they're living out of state, then there's someone to contact to help with that. So where I am in support of quads, but I prefer to keep it out of Malupa, and in the zoning that I will advocate for that we do that. It makes sense, but I want based on the research that I've done and folks I've talked to, is to not have design standards would be a disservice to the community.
So just to clarify, would you support then including a reference here about selecting fourplexes with design standards, so we don't have it here as a listed Malupa selection, but somewhere referencing that we would?
Correct, not in Malupa, but in the other areas, correct, yes.
Okay, all right, great. Yeah, and I am open to some sort of standards to, make sure that we have something that's, appropriate, works in the neighborhood. I do want to address some of the things I heard. Parking one is something we hear a lot about, the concern about parking. I will note, I lived in a fourplex years ago. Nearly all the fourplexes I'm aware of and the residents in them, it is almost always a single person rather than a couple or bigger household. So in most situations, you're gonna have 4 cars associated with that fourplex. And I'll note with single family, and when I was knocking doors on the election last year, and I think anybody doing that work, you can find plenty of single family homes where you have a parents and a lot of kids, and they have 5 cars in their driveway and parked on the street. And so you could easily have just as many cars associated with a single family home as you would with a duplex, spilling over onto the street. And so I don't think it really changes that situation much. You can, and especially if we're allowing duplexes and ADUs, you're still going to have that as well. So in terms of property values, again, this has been researched. That's always a concern, and I understand the concern, but in general, the research shows that having rental houses in your neighborhood does not decrease your property values. Obviously, if you have a bad one, it can, but that's the same for a single family. If you have a single family home that's run down, has a bad occupant, it can run down your property values as well. So the expectation kind of folks moving in, Mr. Walker, I appreciated your comments on that. I thought that was very good. I'd also say, it's not how that's a relatively new concept. The idea that if you move into a neighborhood, it's not going to change. Because city building, until the last several decades, was a lot of change. Neighborhoods evolved with the growing community. In fact, you go back, and I hate to bring up these examples of huge cities, but Philadelphia or New York or all this stuff, all those areas that are big skyscrapers, they used to be, at one time, just houses. And imagine what would have happened if this concept of we have to freeze cities in time, neighborhoods in time, back at the founding of this country. We wouldn't have the country we have today. It'd be totally different. So I don't think it's realistic. I don't think it's good for a city. I think that the reason we're in the bind we are with housing is because we're not allowing our cities to evolve and grow appropriately to adjust. And also, you know, the idea is that it has an impact on me if it's in my neighborhood. Growth is going to have an impact on you, even if it's development of a, you know, open space on the edge of the community with hundreds of units. You know, that's going to affect your schools, it's going to affect your traffic, it's going to affect the feel of the community. You could easily adopt the same mindset for the entire community and say, this community can only stay at 30,000 people for now on because that's the way it was when I moved in. And if you're approving developments, that's not fair. You know, we don't accept it at that level. I'm not sure why we accept it at the neighborhood level, that argument. In terms of just gardens, I'm a gardener, Mr. Nunley, so I certainly hear that and speak to that. But the height limit is the same. It would be the same for whatever structure. So someone can build a single family home at the same height and provide that shadow. So anyways, so it sounds like there's enough support for including a reference to the fourplex outside of the MLUPA that references adopting some standards to have some control there. So.
We'll say those are not going to be in the zoning text amendment. That's going to have to be something council would consider in the future, and that's not something you want to try and do in one meeting.
No.
So I'm just, because we're getting in a habit of going down this trail, something like that will take a work session and council discussion and planning commission and a zoning text update. It's not something you're just going to want to add on the fly in the middle of a council meeting. So because the zoning text amendments, in order to stay on course for adoption by the time state law requires it, has already gone through planning commission. We got the obviously the public hearing coming up on the plan and stuff, but they all align with some of the housing options and stuff that are here, so.
So can I just get clarity on that? So it sounds like what you're recommending then is to.
Yeah, what's coming in front of you guys shortly with, the zoning ordinance is really trying to get us under MLUPA within that deadline. And there's certainly opportunity after that to revisit specific things like that, especially when there's, you know, some differences of opinion on how much we want in there in terms of design standards and so forth. So, but we'll come up with something, and whether it was under housing strategies or wherever we put it in there, that would make that clear.
Because adding a housing option or two isn't necessarily difficult, but when you're coming up with standards that's acceptable to the entire council, there's gonna be some discussion around that it won't happen in one meeting, so.
Okay. All right. So,
long detour.
Yeah. So then the last one we had was all really kind of tied in on page 158. And that was just with some being a little more consistent with the urban renewal districts. And there was a comment there and just some of the consistency in the terminology that we would use there. So we just kind of clarified a few things as we were moving through on that with there, just made a couple little changes. And down on here as well. And that's all we had as far as changes from the last time. So I don't know if there was other comments or questions as we prepare for the public hearing on that.
Connor, I have just one, and it's not related to this chapter. Can I ask to go back, just ask a question?
Mm-hmm.
So it's way back in chapter 4. It was 4.1.2. We talked about the fire. And I just wondered, we were talking about our fire services, if we wanted to also include EMS or emergency services. You see where I'm talking about there? So the first sentence under 4.1.2.
Okay.
I know we refer to it later, but we're kind of known for that.
To expand on that a little bit, I mean, it's certainly intended to include. I mean, in the heading, it's got ambulance services and the and so forth. But I mean,
If
we
you
could
think
expand.
that's okay, I'm fine with that. It just kind of stuck out at me like maybe we weren't.
Yeah, no, I think it is, and I think that there were certainly things we're talking about. You know, like the EMS bills, for example, and here is number 5. You know, we can certainly expand some language in there to make it clear, but it's intended
Everyone's
to include
good with it,
ambulance
I'm fine.
EMS.
Corridor and West Valley plans. not saying what corridor in West Valley plans, not saying what that would be, like, not saying the end result of any of these, just that, you know, we've talked about looking at them again. Exploring alternative zoning regs and models, again, not discussing what the outcome of that would be, and exploring new protections for water quality. Those are the ones I came up with that we discussed, that we need further discussion. We don't know what the outcome of that would be, but just having a section that talked about, you know, future actions we might revisit.
Right, and the reason I scrolled here is in the implementation section, we kind of talked about, you know, it's kind of a living document in a sense. You know, certainly there's a mandatory review every 5 years, but at any point in time, you know, the land use amendments and updates can be done by the city. You know, if the balance of the council wanted to go in a certain direction and dive into more and develop those out, then that's something that can be done at any time. You're not locked in for 5 years. Those can be done by petition as well. So that's something that you know, neighborhood groups could potentially come up with, or whatever the case is. You know, the other aspect is that, you know, neighborhood area and issue plans. You know, an issue plan is like our annexation policy, for example, could be in there. So those are just 3 ways that you can reintroduce that. You don't have to, and I don't know that you necessarily want to put in a laundry list of things that we may or may not talk about in the future, because if council wants to revisit that, you certainly can. And it just may make it confusing to have a list of things that there's not necessarily broad support for in terms of the plan.
So in our last growth policy in the introduction section, you know, we just had, basically you have the totality of the growth policy, but at the beginning it kind of gave staff direction as to what kind of some key deliverables could be as well. You know, action items, I guess you would say, that staff could work on. So certainly things like that could be those if council felt they were warranted and you felt like it was staff time to get on those. For example, like our last growth policy called out, you know, 5 key projects will have tangible positive impact on Kalispell. They include Coria Plan, Downtown Plan, South Kalispell Urban Renewal Plan, Kalispell Pedestrian and Bicycle Master Plan, Kalispell Transportation Plan Update. So it gives us things to work on, you know, certainly as we talk about budgets and things. So if that's a direction council wanted to head, certainly you could do that. I would say, you know, the public hearing is coming up. You can take public comment on it, because that may alter your decision as well, what you may or may not want to add. Because when the document is before the council, certainly I hope we've gone through it enough that don't go down a huge rabbit trail, but certainly you do have the ability to motion and amend and stuff as well. I just let council know that, but you also could do it now.
I recognize flexibility in the plan, and I know it's late, so if there's, you know, significant disagreement about adding that section, we can move on, but any thoughts on that, of having kind of an action item section?
I'm very satisfied with the document as is now. I think it just throws some confusion in there about, you know, some of these items. We can always go to them, but calling them out in here probably puts more emphasis on us having to discuss them at some point. So I'm okay with leaving it more generalized like it is now.
Same.
I would agree.
Okay, that's, yeah, I want to take more time. Thank you for that. I'll open it up one more time for public comment. If anyone wishes to address the council, step to the mic, state your name, or raise your hand online. Oh, man. No? Should I get anything?
Yeah, brief update. Like I said, the public hearing for this will be at the next meeting, as well as we'll have a brief presentation from a consultant and MDT on the US 93 North Access Plan. Have started reaching out to our delegation on the DC trip for those that will be involved in that. Hopefully, obviously with everything going on, travel and things may get interesting here the next couple months, depending on how things go. So but in the meantime, I'm trying to schedule those meetings and get them on the calendar so that we could get our trips booked. You know, I did have a couple other things, but I will just stop right there for tonight.
council. Start with you, Ms. Gabriel.
I'm tired.
Okay.
Just a quick thank you to staff for putting all this together. I know this has been a tremendous amount of work to go through all and listening to all this hash and rehash stuff over and over again. I'm sure it's been entertaining, and we're gonna do it again, I'm sure. So some of this, 'cause I know I'm not done talking about some of this. So, but I just want to thank you all for doing all this work.
So I'll try to keep it short and sweet. I only got 20 points to go over tonight, so. I've had some community requests about the pre-release center and that they were going to be trying to give reports of status. I think a good update back to the council would be good of their successes, their wins. I'm sure they have them. But I think that there was so much concern of where it went and how that went in. I think it would be good just to invite for an update of where they're at. Is it going the way they expected and wanted? Also today there was a fatality accident up on the bypass on the north end. And I talked with Jared a little bit about this before the meeting. I would like to find out from MDT what that threshold, how many people they expect to have seriously injured or killed before they do something about the safety of the bypass. We see down around that section on the west side where Highway 2 and 93 and the bypass intersect, that after a number of accidents, serious accidents, they put up Jersey barriers in the middle of there. I think that I just don't want to wait for the MDT. Well, we have to have so many accidents, it feels like, before we do something. So I don't know if there's something that can be done or said about that to accomplish that. So I think that is all I had.
Everybody okay with community reports on pre-release center, inviting them? Looks like, okay.
The college is actually involved in that as well, so I'd be happy to add in what we're doing and what we may have missed. So I hope that, Jack, you can put that in there. Right at you. Yeah.
Mr. Waterman.
Thank you, Your Honor. And thank you, everybody, for letting me join in up via Zoom today. Really, a huge thank you to the staff for all their work on this. And then also, not only with us, but also with the planning board. Ultimately, though, it all ends up being all of our names on the land use plan. So I do hope that it is worth the work, because I think it is a good way to put forward to the public what we all believe is the best document. And I also just want to really give a big thank you to Rod Kuntz for sending in the report and also sitting in for his 18 months of conversations on septage. Again, I do hope that that would be something that we can find ways to have more conversations in the city and in the community about, because
That's gone on the last couple of years, actually all the way up to Smith Lake, and talking about whether or not it was the right designation given kind of all that thing. So there is a lot of history that probably the council needs to be brought up to speed on, and I will be happy to do that in the near future and happy to sit down with any council members, because that did get brought up a bit tonight. And even that, I believe, is recently got under litigation as well. So now that is in limbo. As usual, like I say, we're always in this constant limbo, which makes it very hard for us to kind of know which route to go when we talk about our treatment. But
Great, thanks. I appreciate that context, and I won't make Jed sit through that if he's already has. I also want to say thank you to Lisa for sending on that information. It is essential for me to stay informed about things that are happening in our community. And the best conduit for this information are representatives that are sitting on these boards. And I appreciate Mr. Kuntz and all the work that he's done. And I appreciate many of you know him and called him and had a conversation with him. I don't know him. I don't have his phone number. And so being able to have these representatives be a conduit into the council only helps us be able to make informed decisions. And along those lines, these community conversations that we're talking about at the pre-lease center, MDT, I'd love to have them as often as we can. It only makes us more informed. These meetings are long, but I really love having these conversations with you. So I don't regret it.
I'm with Carrie, I'm tired.
Yeah, Mr. Chair.
Guess who's not? I didn't have to leave and come back this time. Great. I really, since I have the floor right now and some of this may be reported and some of it may watch online, if you're in Ward 4 and you have your 2 cents about fourplexes and you want to give me and Jed your opinion, please do so, because we are really looking at this. We want to make sure that we are representing our ward correctly. I also really appreciate being able to talk about the fourplex issue tonight in detail, because last week we had the comment about it came in after 10 o'clock. It was almost like a parting shot across the bow, and then we sailed away, right? So I appreciate being able to talk to it in more detail after actually reaching out to some ward members that I know. I'd also like to thank Jared, Chief Venizio, and staff for helping to configure the incident report around the weekend cruise enforcement. We're very close to having a stable set of metrics that we can show month after month, and just in time for repeatable stats to be available to us that we can look over this cruising season. When I say cruising with a C, okay? I will tell you that the stats look much better than they did before, post our emergency services levy and our police hiring that we did subsequent to that. So I'm really excited about this. I know I'm a big pain in the butt for the staff here to have this added every month, but it's something that the people of Kalispell are really interested in, and I'd love to show that, hey, we are stepping things up. Here's what it looks like. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and I just want to say thank you to everybody for this process. It has been long for the reviewing the growth plan, and I appreciate the patience of council and staff as we work through it. I think it has been tough for new council members, because this is kind of to jump into your first couple of months on council, and to have such kind of an intensive review of something, a lot of debate. It's not always like this, I promise. And also it is tough at late nights, and I did feel bad last week. There's certain parts where it made sense to talk about something when we got to that section, and unfortunately at the end of the plan was some sections where there were some big ideas that I wanted to throw out, and I did certainly note that I was doing it late and everybody was tired, and I felt bad about that, but it was the time when it came up. So I'll also note, we did receive some emailed comments concerned about maybe how I was running the meetings. I will say that my approach has been, when I knew it was a big item in discussion, I turned to council for input and discussion. If I thought it was a smaller item, I just talked about it and kind of tried to move along with the expectation that if you had an objection, you would interject and offer it. So, it's a little bit, when you're going over such a large document, so many issues, to stop at every single item and check in. So there was a little bit of an expectation that if you had an objection to what I felt were some of the smaller things moving through, that you would jump in. And that's how we've done that in the past on work sessions as well, I know. So, and I would expect that in the future as well. I'll try to check in, and when I think for sure we're going to have differences of opinion, but if I don't, just jump in. That's part of the process. So, yeah, and we're not done yet, and coming back, finish this up, and then we got zoning and subdivision and a whole lot else. It's going to be a busy year, so it's good working with all you, and we'll continue on. All right, we're adjourned.
And then